Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, September 13th, and we'll reconvene the meeting of the Oregon Water Commission. And first up on our agenda item will be agenda item D, a Harney Basin rulemaking update.
Give me 1 second, Chair Cripps. Let me get up the presentation. Please confirm, can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Chair Cripps, the Commission. For the record, my name is Kelly Mines. I'm the Water Policy Analyst for the Oregon Water Resources Department and the Rule Coordinator for the Division 512 update. I'll pass it over to my partner.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning, members of the Commission, Chair Quemps. For the record, my name is Tim Seymour, and I'm the Assistant Manager for the Groundwater Section here at the Oregon Water Resources Department.
Okay, so today we're going to be covering a few topics regarding Division 512. First is Tim is going to be talking about defining the goals for the Harney Basin groundwater levels, and then measuring success. So what it means, what does it look like when we reach that goal? And then I will be talking to you about evaluating the options through the management scenario development and testing, as well as giving you a general update for the rulemaking and outside efforts that we're having with discussions with the community.
Thanks, Kelly. So I want to start off by acknowledging that the way we think about goals for groundwater levels have been heavily influenced by conversations with the RAC. And that's happened as part of this rulemaking process. The RAC has been instrumental in helping us sort of coalesce the different considerations related to goal setting. And over the next couple of slides, I'm going to walk you through the thought process for setting a goal for groundwater levels in the Harney Basin. And we talked through these exact slides with the RAC at our last RAC meeting. So if we jump to the next slide, Kelly. The first thing we have here is a list of considerations that have informed our decision-making related to goal setting. The first of which is that the longer we take to solve the problem of declining groundwater levels, the more impacts will be felt. And these impacts we've talked about previously with the Commission, but they include things like dry domestic wells, decreased natural discharge in the form of spring flow and evapotranspiration by native groundwater-dependent plants, a continued loss of groundwater storage, which manifests as lower groundwater levels and has impacts on the cost of pumping water, and a decrease in water quality and land subsidence are possibilities that could occur with lowered groundwater levels. So those are all the impacts that the longer we take to solve this problem, the more likely they are to happen and the more that they will occur in some cases. So the next consideration we have is that the groundwater system is complex, and thus the response to reductions in use will be complex. So this isn't a simple problem to solve for a whole host of reasons, but the one we're talking about here specifically is that this is a complex groundwater system, and any changes we make are not going to be uniform throughout the basin. The next considerations we have here are essentially three questions that we've asked ourselves repeatedly throughout this process. And we've thought through them in many different ways. And those questions are, should all the areas of the basin have the same goal? Do all areas need the same actions on the same timeline? And should the goal be to recover water levels so that a critical designation could be removed? And to be clear, we're not looking for you to answer these questions. They're here simply to help you understand the questions we're considering as we move through this process. So next slide, Kelly. So those are the considerations we've had in the back of our mind as we've gone through this process, and oftentimes in the forefront of our mind. The next thing we looked at was goals in other critical groundwater areas. So there's currently 7 critical groundwater areas in Oregon, and they were all designated, the most recent of which being in the early 90s. And so we started to look at what was the goal in other critical areas. And in the Butter Creek and Stage Gulch critical areas, which are the most recent critical areas to be designated, they defined reasonably stable as the goal. And in short, that definition here is listed here in full, but in short, it basically says that over the course of a year, there can be up to 1 foot of change in water level, but over a 5-year period, there should be no decline. And so that's how they've defined reasonably stable in those two critical areas. All the other critical groundwater areas, of which there are 5, reference reasonably stable water levels as a reason to designate the critical area, but it doesn't. But they don't define the term. And one thing we want to note here is that the Butter Creek and Stage Gulch definition of reasonably stable essentially ignores the 100+ feet of decline that occurred in those areas and resulted in the designation. So that reasonably stable definition is really focused on a rate definition and not on understanding the magnitude of decline that's occurred in those areas. So let's jump to the next slide, Kelly. So we've got our considerations. We've looked at other critical groundwater area goals. Now we're looking at statutory policy. So the statutory policy in ORS 537-525 tells us that reasonably stable groundwater levels be determined and maintained. However, reasonably stable is not defined in statute or in rule. It's only defined in the Stage Gulch and Butter Creek critical groundwater areas, as we've discussed previously. And in the case of Harney, the authority to designate a critical area exists because the thresholds of excessively declining, which is defined as 3 feet of decline per year for at least 10 years, and declined excessively, which is defined as greater than 50 feet magnitude of decline, have been crossed. And from our perspective, this situation is not reasonably stable. And we don't want to define reasonably stable in a way that ignores the greater than 50 feet of decline that has occurred in parts of the basin. And therefore, the department believes we should focus our efforts specifically on the decline rate by focusing on what we've called a target water level trend. And this is a term that was introduced by Ivan at a previous commission meeting. So in essence, a target water level trend is essentially a goal that focuses similar to what Stage Gulch and Butter Creek have done, but we're going to use a different term. And if we jump to the next slide, I want to talk briefly and reiterate the points for why target water level trend is the focus and not reasonably stable. So to focus on that decline rate, we want to use this term, target water level trend. And the reasons why we want to focus on target water level trend is that portions of the basin are overdrawn, declined excessively, and excessively declining. And that declined excessively value is beyond what we could possibly consider reasonably stable, as is the excessively declining rate currently in the basin. And so we don't want to define reasonably stable because we believe that would ignore the magnitude of groundwater loss that has occurred in the basin. And so we want to focus on this term, target water level trend, and the target water level trend is how we'll express the goal for groundwater levels in the Harney Basin going forward. Next slide. So then what should the target water level trend be? And it's currently the department's position that all areas of the basin need to achieve a target water level trend of no decline. And this means to us that water levels should not show a long-term decline and that they should exist in some sort of dynamically stable range. And when I say dynamically stable range, I know the commission has received many presentations on allocation and they've talked through this dynamically stable range concept. But essentially it's that there's going to be variability year over year and seasonally. But what we do not want to see is a long-term trend of decline. Another point here is that some wells will show declines, some wells will be stable, and some wells will show recovery. That's purely a function of the groundwater system. And as we try to stabilize groundwater levels, we will end up in this state where we have this variability in what is occurring in different wells within an area. And then the last point here is that we believe no individual well should exceed some defined rate or magnitude of decline. And we haven't defined that. We're talking with the RAC at our next meeting specifically about this topic. And we hope to get input on what the members of the RAC feel are reasonable essentially endpoints or constraints for magnitude and rate of decline in individual wells. And really the problem we're trying to solve here is a problem of extremes. So in when characterizing water levels in an area, it is possible that you could have a well that's recovering at a really rapid rate. You could have a well that's declining at a really rapid rate, and you could have a well that's essentially stable. And if you average those together, you could have stable groundwater levels. But is that acceptable that there's a well recovering really rapidly and a well that is declining really rapidly? And what are the values that we're willing to accept in those cases? So that's what I mean by that point. So this is the department's current position on what the goal for the groundwater levels in the Harney Basin is. And that is that we want to see a target water level trend of no decline. So if we go to the next slide, Kelly. I want to talk about where we're seeking RAC input on this. So as I mentioned, we talked with the RAC at the last meeting, presenting some of these slides, discussing goals for groundwater levels in the Harney Basin. At the next meeting, we're really seeking more focused input on how success is measured, the spatial extent for water use reductions, and for how we calculate trends in the basin. So what does the geography look like, and how should we group wells together for these analysis? And then the timeline for implementation of water use reductions. So what is a reasonable timeline for implementation, and what then do we expect the timeline to look like for responses to the changes in management within the basin? So those are areas we're seeking input from the RAC on. If we go to the next slide, Kelly, I want to talk a little bit more about defining the spatial extent and then about timing. So as I've mentioned previously, the basin is complex, and while it's all one groundwater system, declines are not uniform across the basin, and responses to change in water use won't be uniform across the basin. So how we draw boundaries to group portions of the basin together, and really to group wells together within the basin, is important for evaluation of water level trends and for management. As I mentioned previously, depending on the wells you've grouped together and their statistics, right, their current water level trends, you can greatly impact whether or not an area is considered stable or not. And so how we define those geographic areas, as I said, is an ongoing conversation with the RAC. And we're really making every effort to provide a sound scientific approach to drawing these boundaries and giving the community the information they need, as well as doing our best to consider local knowledge in that process. And so obviously, anytime you draw a boundary, it's a challenge because there will always be people on one side of the line or the other. But we're doing our best to make it clear why we're making the decisions we're making and to consider as much information that the RAC can provide as possible. So if we jump to the next slide, I want to talk also about timing to achieving stable groundwater levels. So the timeline for reduction or implementing water use reductions, either through voluntary or regulatory methods, will directly impact how long it takes to achieve stable groundwater levels, or in our terms that we've talked about, a target water level trend of no decline. And again, I want to make it clear that impacts of longer timelines will vary based on the rate of decline within each area of the basin. So areas with more severe rates of decline are going to have more rapid impacts than areas of the basin with less severe rates of decline. And so choosing a timeline for implementation requires balancing impacts to different interests. And we are trying to be as inclusive as we can here and capturing input from as many of the different interests as possible. And those include interests such as irrigators, domestic well owners, groundwater dependent ecosystems and the groups that care deeply about them. And then, also trying to consider those local economic impacts of any changes. And so if we go to the next slide, I want to just wrap up the topic of timing with a diagram here to try and illustrate the point of how this process flows. And so there are components here to the regulatory process that add time. And as you can see, once rules are adopted, establishing the permissible total withdrawal, which is the amount of water that can be pumped within different parts of the basin, then a contested case process has to be initiated. And it's not until we've gone through that contested case process that we can actually begin to regulate and enforce those PTW values. And so then if we assume that there's going to be some sort of timeline for implementation of the PTW, and so before we get to that value where we believe that amount of pumpage will resolve or will result in stable groundwater levels, then there's a time lag there as well. And then once we've finally achieved a full PTW implementation, there's going to be a lag time as the system responds to those management changes. And so it's not as simple as to say that once we adopt these rules, we're going to achieve our target. There's a substantial amount of time that could exist between rule adoption and achieving success here. And so I just want to make sure the commission is really aware that this is the process that we have as defined in statute and in our Division 10 rules. And this is the broad timeline that we expect to occur as we continue through this process. So that said, I want to now transition to measuring success. So we've talked about the goal, we've talked about defining the spatial extent, defining the timing, what that looks like. Now I want to dig into measuring success here. And as I mentioned, there's challenges to measuring success, and the methods we choose for measuring success are going to have impacts on water levels, and they're going to have impacts on water users. And I also want to note that measuring success is one of the topics that we'll continue to discuss with the RAC at future meetings. And it's an incredibly important conversation because of the impacts it will have on water users and all of the different interests throughout the basin. So next slide, Kelly, I want to talk briefly about some of the challenges in measuring success. Those include, as I have said previously, how wells are grouped spatially for analysis impact the calculation of trends. I feel like I'm harping on this point, but I think it's really important. As it's been said, you can make numbers say anything you want to based on how you manipulate them. And we don't want to be in a situation here where we're accused of manipulating the numbers. We want to be clear and transparent in how we're grouping wells together and why we're doing that. And then we want those calculations of trends to be clear and transparent and understandable to all members of the community. The second challenge here is how do we account for those short-term changes caused by wet or dry years? So what is that dynamically stable range that we believe water levels can exist within year over year as we move towards our goal of a target water level trend of no decline? Another challenge, as I've said before, is that some wells will show declines and some will be stable and some will show recovery. And so how do we communicate that to people in the basin whose wells are showing recovery while other wells are allowed to continue declining? And how does that, how is that fair? And that's a real challenge for measuring success here and for communicating success. And then, as I said before, how do we handle extremes? So are there some values that we're of decline that we're just not going to accept? And we need to change our management scenario in order to ensure that we don't have those kinds of extremes occurring. And then last, what is a reasonable timeline for achieving success? So what's a reasonable timeline for implementation? And then what's a reasonable timeline for having those implemented changes take effect on the system? So as we put it in context of that bigger, broader picture that I showed previously of the entire process we're going through, what is a reasonable timeline? So those are some of the key challenges we've identified for measuring success. And as I said, we want to continue having that conversation with the RAC. And if we go to the next slide, Kelly, we've tossed out some ideas for how to measure success. And we'll be diving more in depth on these. And we're hopeful that we can come to, as I said, a clear and transparent process for characterizing water levels within the basin and measuring success. And so some of these ideas have included, calculating a mean of all static water level trends in an area and ensuring that demonstrates no decline. So is that a reasonable way to do it? Another idea we've tossed out is that potentially all wells should show no decline, but obviously that's confounded by the fact that we know as the system equilibrates, some wells will show decline while some wells show recovery. So maybe that's not the best idea. We've also talked about topics like designating sentinel wells, so identifying specific wells in areas that we believe are representative and using only the water level trends from those wells. So there's much to talk about with the REC, and I think it's important that we have those conversations, and as I said, make it clear and transparent in whatever rules we adopt, how we're going to do that, and ensure that the community understands that. So to highlight some of these challenges with measuring success, I want to put up some information related to our most recent water level trend analysis that was done using our most recent measurements here in 2024. So Kelly, if you go to the next slide, this slide here contains a map, or two maps rather, and this is the Harney Basin, and the areas that are colored in there are our proposed 15 subareas. We have left those subareas in place for water level trend analysis because we believe this is an accurate representation of how wells could be grouped in the basin. Scientifically, it's defensible. And these two maps really highlight some of the challenges of measuring success. So on the left map, we have decline magnitude, with blue, the darkest blue, showing declines of 0 to 5 feet, and red showing declines of 75 to 116.9 feet. That's pretty precise. And so you can see that across the basin, water level magnitudes of decline really vary. And so that, confounds our work here in measuring success. And the map on the right shows decline rates in feet per year. Again, with blue being the least decline rate at 0 to 4.8 feet of gain. So that is, there are wells in the basin that are still gaining in water level. And red being a decline of 8 feet per year to 10.5 feet per year. So those are incredibly substantial rates of decline and in this basin. And obviously one of the key reasons why we're focused on this basin is because these are some of the greatest rates of decline of anywhere statewide. And so, as I said, again, the spread of decline rates across the basin is substantial. And there are areas where decline rates are much lower, and there's areas where decline rates are much more severe. But then there's decline rates that are interspersed throughout the whole. And so that, again, confounds how we go about calculating water level trends and how we measure success and whether an area, we can consider it having reached our target water level trend of no decline or not. So now I want to then go one step closer on the ground, and I want to look at two different subareas. And the first subarea I want to look at here is North Harney. And so North Harney is this little subarea that we've delineated to the east of Burns. It's on Highway 20. And the reason I want to point it out is because of the wide range of values that exist in wells from both a magnitude and rate standpoint. So I've listed the magnitude and rate statistics that we've calculated for this subarea here, and you can see that the spread of magnitude of decline extends from 9.1 feet per year, 9.1 feet total to 66.8 feet total. So we've crossed that threshold of excessively declined in at least one well here, and we have an average decline of 35.9 feet in total. And so that's a substantial amount of decline in this small area. And then when we take a look at the rate statistics, we see that we have a broad range of decline rates as well. So in this small area, we have a well that's declining at 0.9 feet per year, and we have another well that's declining at 4 feet per year, with average declines across this area at 2.3 feet per year. So you can see how grouping wells together can really affect our final calculation of, say, an average or a median of decline within an area. And then I want to compare this to a much larger subarea that we've delineated in the basin. So the other one I want to show here is Upper Silver Creek. And if we go to the next slide, you can see here that we have a much smaller variance in magnitude of decline, from having a well that hasn't declined to having a well with a max decline of 23.1 feet of total decline, with an average decline of only 5.4 feet across that subarea. But when we look at rate, we have an even broader rate of decline, with the minimum decline, the least declining well declining at a rate of 0.1 feet per year, and our max rate of decline for a well in this area being 4.4 feet per year. And to put it in perspective, this Upper Silver Creek area is to the west of Burns. It's sort of out in the Riley area. And this subarea is incredibly large in comparison to the last one. It's about 32 times bigger. And so with that comes a challenge of, again, how we've grouped these wells together. What is our decline rate here? And what is our range of decline magnitude? And so hopefully this helps convey not just what the situation is, but also some of the challenges in doing these water level trend analyses, and as we group wells together and try to understand what is the current situation within this area of the basin. Since we have to do something at a grouped level, since regulating each individual well is just simply not possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly, who's going to talk more about how we're going to move forward with developing management scenarios and then modeling potential outcomes.
Thank you, Tim. So as Tim has been talking about, he's been talking about meeting our goal of the target low trend of no decline and kind of the challenges around measuring success. And really what I'm about to talk about now kind of combines those two topics into hopefully an outcome for groundwater management in the Harney Basin. And so I'm going to start talking about the development of management scenarios. And so just a brief background, this year the USGS has published the Harney Basin groundwater model. And what this tool allows us to do is illustrate how the Harney Basin will respond to different management scenarios. So targeted groundwater reductions in certain areas along a timeline. And really what it would do, this model is useful for testing different management scenarios and evaluating their outcomes, and will help us better inform the rulemaking process. With ultimately whatever management scenario comes out of this process, we have a set of rules written in Division 512 for critical groundwater area. And so over the next several months, we're going to be working with the RAC to kind of to develop 3 management scenarios that would be inputted into the model. And this slide is kind of demonstrating the steps that we're going to be following, right? So starting on the left here, setting in the goal. So we set the goal of the target low trend of no decline. And why that is important, out of the 3 management scenarios that we're working with the RAC, they need to meet that goal of a target low trend of no decline. And so the next step after that is designing the scenario around the management scenarios. And basically what that is we are asking the RAC to provide 3 inputs. So the 3 provide three main inputs into the model, and that's around when, how much, and where, right? So when is that timeline piece that Tim was talking about for implementing the PTW? So how long are we going to take to fully implement this PTW in this management scenario? Where, that's around that spatial extent that Tim was talking about. So tell us the spatial extent that we are going to do the groundwater reductions, and then how much. So what is the volume of reduction that we are going to curtail in that spatial area? And then there's some other questions around that as well, like how are we going to allocate that water? Is it by prior appropriation or is it by beneficial use? So once we work with them to develop these scenarios and give us those three inputs, we will then go on to the next one to test the scenario. We will input those models into the Harney Basin groundwater model, and the model will output results and generate figures, so in forms of like figures and maps and other information. And we will use the output of that model to evaluate if those management scenarios has reached the goal of a target water level trend of no decline. If it does not, then there is an iterative process, right? So we're going to go back to the RAC and say, okay, this management scenario made the goal, these two did not, for example, and then we adjust those inputs to further kind of hopefully get down to we're actually meeting that goal of target level trend of no decline. Rolls right off the tongue. So that's kind of the general process that we're going to be following when developing these three management scenarios. We're hoping to get three. I'm hoping to get three management scenarios from the RAC in addition to the two that OWRD is running. One is our 15 sub-area management scenario, and another one we're still kind of working on, but those are what we're hoping to run into the model. And again, this model just allows us to evaluate the effectiveness of on different management scenarios and different regulation scenarios, and it tells us how the groundwater levels will respond in those scenarios. Okay, then now I'm going to kind of just give you a brief rulemaking update. There's a lot going on in the basin right now, including some outside community conversations as well as the RAC process going on. So first I'm going to start with that outside community conversation. So starting in September, we have the Oregon consensus, and so starting this month on September 9th, actually last Monday, the Oregon consensus in support of the High Desert Partnership started hosting these outside discussion groups around the Division 512 process. What these groups are really are a space for the community to kind of work through these really challenging questions that come out of the RAC, and just provide more time for kind of provide more time for communicating and talking about these issues. OWRD is supporting this effort. We're going to the meetings and answering any questions that may come out of those discussion groups. These discussion groups are not a decision-making body. Instead, what they will do is whatever decisions or conversations that they have around these challenging questions will be brought back to the RAC, and we'll talk about it within that RAC. So this is really just another arm for more conversation. Generally, they will meet on Mondays from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Sometimes we'll do full-day workshops. And so the plan for September is that we have 4 meetings. So September 9th was kind of the opening to the discussion groups about what the charges of discussion groups and what we're going to be covering this month. And then we have 2 meetings next week on September 16th and September 17th. September 16th is an all-day meeting, and it's really focused on the developing those management scenarios. We hope to get a few ideas to bring back to the RAC so we can further flesh out those ideas in our October RAC. And then on the September 17th meeting, we'll be discussing the physical impact. Hopefully talking about what the physical impact is and the requirements under the notice, and then hoping to get more information so we can actually start doing that analysis. We've already gotten a lot from the community, and we're hoping maybe we can get more of it. And then last, on that September 23rd, it's kind of the follow-up discussion about, this is what we talked about on the 16th and 17th. The goal is to really just clarify the conversation and kind of get some materials so we can put it back into the RAC on October 2nd. So it's really exciting. It's an exciting time when we are looking forward to having these conversations. In terms of the rulemaking, we have 4 planned. I know this is a kind of a matrix. I know there's a lot on the screen, so just bear with me. I'll walk you through it. So we have 4 planned RACs coming up, one in October, then November and December, and then January of next year. Really, the October, November, December meeting, this large square block here, is around the conversation of developing those management scenarios, right? So we're hoping in our October meeting, we have 3, and then we go through an iterative process through the November and December meetings with the goal of selecting a management scenario in our December meeting on the 18th there. We'll also be talking about other different topics. So starting in our November meeting, we'll be discussing our classification as well. So in addition to designating the basin the critical groundwater area, we are classifying uses, which means just basically what is the allowed use of water in the basin. And then we are also going to be implementing a measuring and reporting requirement under our serious water management problem area rules and statutes. We'll also be discussing in November voluntary agreement guidelines for Harney Basin. We've been working hard to develop a policy guideline around voluntary agreements, and then continue discussing the physical impact. So there's a lot on that November meeting, and we will do our best. These meetings are going to be 6 hours long, and so all-day meetings, and hopefully we can get through there. Come this December, like I said, we will be selecting a management scenario and continuing the voluntary agreement conversation and physical impact conversation. And then by that point, we will hopefully have flushed out rules, because we know what management scenario we'll have, and we'll have classification and swamp rule language. And we'll start talking about rule language with the RAC there. And then on the 13th is kind of the finalization of the rule language and finalization of the physical impact, as well as the voluntary agreement policy document. And so that is what we have for the rulemaking. A lot on our plate, and we're excited to go ahead. Thank you so much. That's what we have. Any questions or comments?
Questions or comment from the commission? No? Do you have one?
Go ahead, Joe. I'll put mine together.
Okay, all right. Is it all right? These are not working. Does it matter? Can you hear me okay? Kelly, Tim, everybody?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. First off, really helpful presentation. The way you described the situation I found very engaging and easy to follow. So thanks for your prep on that. I would encourage us to perhaps, if possible, and I know sometimes we're preparing presentations right up until the time to give them. I think some of that information, if we had gotten in the packet, would make it even better and more effective use of time for discussion, but excellent presentation. I want to start with something just as a baseline. For those cumulative declines and rates of decline, what's the time period that you were looking at? You mentioned 2024 data, but I assume that was over a 10, 20, 30, 50-year period for those rates and cumulative declines?
Yeah, so for magnitude of decline, we're going from highest known. So that could be the total water level record that we have for the well, going back as far as potentially the 1930s. For the rate-based test, I believe we are looking at wells that had at least 4 data points, so at least 4 measurements. We're looking at spring highs, and we're constraining it to data from, I believe it was 2016 forward, but it might have been 2018. I'd have to pull up the document really quick to confirm that.
Either way, that's dramatic decline. That's helpful to understand that. So you started by that fundamental question of what our goal is, and I'm thinking about the Warm Springs tribe's comment on the groundwater allocations. Why aren't we trying to bring groundwater levels back up to historic highs, which is when you're starting with a goal, I think a goal like that is probably the best place to start. I mean, why, if we've been in sort of a mad managed aquifer decline situation for the last 100 years, why wouldn't we at least begin conceptually to say, well, what would it take to get us out of that and turn it around in the other direction? And I don't know if your models are allowing you to do that, even just from a modeling standpoint, even though on the ground, I think from a water user standpoint, somebody would be like, oh my God, there's no way we could do that, and you're putting me out of business. I do think it would be really interesting to see. I mean, is it possible with precipitation trends and other things that are working against us, it seems, to just to see what that would take? Because I do wonder if with things like the CREP, which I assume is still going forward, the groundwater CREP, and other sort of incentives that, similar to or along the lines of what Rep. Owens has said for years, we're going to see dramatic land use change there, pre-voluntary. And so seeing that higher bar, I think it would be informative. It may be impossible, but what would it take to shoot for this? Okay, then that gets us closer into, all right, what's more pragmatic and realistic from a near-term standpoint? And then I guess, I'm just curious, is there any work being done anticipating that? I mean, the CREP program, I think, was a 20-year agreement, is that right? 20-year withdrawal agreement, and I know driving through the valley here, you can see what happens when ag land gets out of production. It immediately turns into a fire-prone weed field. And so trying to anticipate, okay, if some of these high-draw, relatively low-return areas over the next 20 years are going to come out of agricultural direct hay meadow, what would it take to incentivize a landowner to convert it back to native grass, for example? So it could be used for grazing land or that sort of thing. Is there any link to projected future land uses that are a part of these conversations? And then the last question, and this is a lot, I guess, that assumption on the timeline of that contested case hearing. My memory is when we talked about this, I don't know, 6 months, a year ago, the question of, well, does it have to go to contested cases if, for example, the voluntary agreements momentum gets going forward? Is that just a reflection of reality? Everybody's saying, no, we want contested case, or is it still possible that this could be resolved outside the contested case approach using voluntary agreements?
Chair Quimps, Commissioner Mole, thank you for those questions. I'm going to try to hit all 3 of them. I think there were 3. So the first one, in relation to recovering groundwater levels and what can be modeled, the USGS model report that came out at the same time as the actual model had 2 future-looking scenarios in it. One was essentially assuming that no action is taken and 2018 pumping levels are continued indefinitely through 2100. So that sort of shows us the what if business remains as it exists currently through the end of the century. And there's figures, charts, graphs that show declines continue, they spread out, etc. The second scenario that they ran was what would happen if we ceased all pumping in the basin. And so they essentially shut off all pumping. There no domestic, no irrigation, no municipal, essentially all pumping. So what is the absolute best case scenario for water level recovery if you take away all human influence in the form of pumping? And so again, we have charts, graphs, maps in that model report that show that. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, it is possible to show what recovery looks like. And we already have a scenario that's probably, I would say, very extreme, in that we know we're not going to shut off all pumping in the basin. But it shows us what the absolute fastest response would be if we were to shut off all pumping. So that gives us an edge case we can compare against. The second question you had there was related to incentivizing land use changes. And so from my perspective, it's the CREP program that's really our best incentive for those land use changes and ensuring that land goes back to native species and not just becoming bare earth or weed-laden fields that are ripe for potential wildfire. We have not had conversations around how to incentivize outside of the CREP program, though I appreciate that comment, and we will definitely consider that as we move forward. And then related to the timeline and voluntary versus regulatory implementation and that contested case. So we're still discussing what the best approach there is. And I believe one part of it is that a voluntary agreement can control in lieu of orders of the commission. So if the commission were to approve a voluntary agreement, then that voluntary agreement essentially then acts as if it was an order of the commission for all intents and purposes. And in that case, a contested case wouldn't be needed. However, if that voluntary agreement, for whatever reason, falls apart, we would need some sort of regulatory backstop in which we can ensure that we don't lose the benefits of the water use reductions that have occurred. And so it's very possible the voluntary agreement could get started right away and water use reductions could begin immediately, provided the water users can come to agreement on what their approach would be. And this commission agrees with that approach and adopts that voluntary agreement. And we wouldn't have to go through the contested case in order to get water use reductions. So that's a very good point around timeline is the community could take charge of the, some of their future here and begin implementation without us having to go through the full regulatory process in order to force those reductions. So, thank you.
Thank you for the response. We need to pause and take 5 minutes. Apparently the camera froze, and so we need to address that.
That's okay. Joe took all my questions.
per acre of reduction there.
Thank you. Vice Chair Smitherman?
Thank you. I want to echo what Commissioner Mole said about just how well the presentation was put together. I really appreciate all the details. I was able to follow it. And it's definitely a big undertaking in this area, but it needs to be done. Like you said that this is the greatest rates of decline in the entire state. And have you found any wells in the area that aren't showing any rate of decline?
Sorry, we just got the audio back, so I believe I caught the question, and that is, are there wells in the area that are not showing decline? So are they stable or
Great job on your
potentially gaining?
presentation. Yes.
Great, thank you. Yes. So as shown on the map, there are at least a couple of wells in the basin that we included in our water level trends analysis that are either stable, so showing no rate of decline, or are actually increasing in water level in this most recent trends analysis. So yes, in short, there are some wells that are not declining.
Okay. And, maybe I'm getting down into the weeds here, but so if you're going to be grouping wells into geographic areas, and there's a well owner who's contesting, just saying that, no, I don't think I belong in this particular group. Is there a mechanism for them to work with the department to figure out whether they are in the right geographic group or whether there's an exception? I know that you probably are planning to talk about all of those details, so that's why with the RAC, but I just thought it would be good to bring up as something that could be coming with grouping wells together.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a challenging one. When it comes to actually issuing orders, the contested case process exists for individual well owners and water right holders to contest decisions made related to the orders that are then being issued. But that's after sub areas or boundaries are delineated. So the best place for members of the public to provide feedback to the department, there's two real key places. One is we released a draft groundwater report as per our Division 10 rule requirements. And in that, we characterize the basin, the groundwater reservoir, and the reasons or the thresholds that have been crossed that authorize the department and the commission to move forward with a critical groundwater area designation. So that's a place where people can provide feedback to us on that report and potentially call out their specific situation. The other is by attending a RAC meeting, or when we get to public hearings, they could attend a public hearing and provide comment that way. They could also provide written comment, and we'll be considering all of those as we go through this rulemaking process. So that is, at this point, really from my perspective, the best way for people to provide information to us for consideration in this process. I think one of the challenges here is that, remember that, as I said, this is a complex system, and it is also one groundwater reservoir, as we've stated in our report. And so the effects of changes on one user will have effects on other users and vice versa. And so we need to make sure that whatever rules we put in place are based on substantial evidence, best available science. And so we're working with our technical experts to make sure that we're doing that and that these well groupings are scientifically defensible and as based on as the best information that we possibly have. So.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Wolf.
Yes, I just wanted to say great presentation. Really like the direction that I'm seeing out of this presentation relative to where I think we were months ago with the RAC, and I'm going to assume that the community members in the Harney Basin are a little more excited about where you're at now versus several months ago. And so it really seems to me like you're working with the RAC and doing everything you can to facilitate them within the rules of the department. And so just like to say great job for that. And then to Joe's question about not only CREP, but the NRCS has a CSP program that allows you to pick enhancements that they pay you over a 5-year period for maintaining those enhancements. And I'm not sure if you can piggyback the CREP and the CSP, but that's also another source of revenue to facilitate those properties to be converted back to natural range.
Thank you, Commissioner Wolf. Any other comments from commissioners?
Can I ask one more quick technical question? Is it possible, financially or otherwise, to have an administrative law judge assigned to a group that is trying to come up with voluntary agreements to sort of help them look at sidebars on, now you're crossing over into a contested case kind of stuff, or this is a good direction to go so you don't get into a contested case? Is there precedent for that? Is there a mechanism for that?
Chair Quims, Commissioner Mall, the department is working with our counsel and other attorneys hired by the water users are also part of the discussion around voluntary agreements. It's a completely different beast than the contested case hearing, and the statutes are fairly simple. We haven't done one yet in the state of Oregon. So the team, both our staff and the groundwater users, are working together to come up with some guidelines. And we've got the legal counsel involved. So as we come up with questions, we're running that past various attorneys there to get suggestions and advice on it. There's much to be learned from this process. It's going to be very interesting to find and see what the final product would look like when we get the first voluntary agreement to come forward. But it really does provide the local community a great opportunity to sort of control their own destiny and come up with ways, starting hopefully relatively soon, to start reducing groundwater use in a manner that works us towards the permissible total withdrawal limit reserve.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'd like to move to public comment now, and we have 3 people. Representative Mark Owen from the legislature, Chris Hall from the Water League is in person, and Conrad Fisher from the Water Climate Trust is in person. Representative Owens, would you like to provide your comment, please?
Thank you, Chair Quince, member of the commission. First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having this continued agenda item at your commission meetings. And I want to thank the department for slowing down the last 2 months because of the natural disasters and the fires in our community, and giving us time to work through those before we start back on these discussions. I'm looking forward to the discussion groups that will start in earnest on Monday, so we can start looking through those management scenarios and starting to understand the complexity of these issues, so we can come together with the commission, with the department, and figure out what a volunteer agreement looks like for our community. I also want to thank Tim for not putting up the first slide of Weaver Springs and looking at different parts of the basin. That was good. Thanks, Tim. I would encourage the commission to go back and look at the current water level trend maps, because they are fascinating. If you look at the magnitude of decline, which is the period of record, there's a lot of blue dots out there that signify 0 to 5 feet. And there's a lot of red dots out there that are the most declining parts in the state. But the complexity just in this basin is amazing. And we're not going to have all the answers to understand that complexity. But the rules are going to have to, and the geographic designations, in my opinion, are going to have to look at that. Because put yourself in the owner or water right. Say you happen to be in one of those that have dropped less than 5 foot. Maybe actually have come up 2 foot in the last year. You're going to be under critical groundwater designation, maybe regulated off. That's potential reality. That's tough. But now you're in one of those areas that's dropping 8 to 10 foot, has dropped to 100 foot. I mean, it's still tough, but reality is probably there. So as we look at these sub areas, as we group wells, as Tim said, it's going to be tough to figure out all the complexities in the individual wells. But I would just encourage you, go back and look at that current water level trend. Then Kelly talked about management scenarios. And this is where I'm thankful, in 18 months we've got here. We're going to talk about what is the goal? What does that mean to the community? And how do we get there? So I'm looking forward to those conversations. When we look at goal and we talk, zero rate of decline, and Director Gall said this in meetings before, and I do agree with them that, that's aspirational. And that's where we need to be working towards. But that's still a very tough goal for the community to look at in a 3, 5, 10-year process. We've talked about previous commission meetings that, the community doesn't see, the majority of the community doesn't see the goal as how fast we can implement permissible total withdrawal. But I do believe there's processes in these groundwater rules that allow 10-year checks. And maybe as we work through this in the next couple of months, maybe slowing the rate of decline down by 50%, 70% on a mean or medium well. Maybe that's a goal that we can get behind with you guys and gals and figure out. And then after we do that the first time, maybe it's, a simple process that we have to repeat that until we hit whatever the aspirational goal that we come upon. Yeah, a lot more optimistic, Commissioner Wolf. I believe that we will come together. I will keep you in the loop. The time frame has me concerned. As Kelly said, it's going to be a iterative process on the management scenarios, which is going to take some feedback. And trying to have rules out by January will be tough. It will be. So I know the department's considering that, working with Oregon Consensus, working with the governor's office to make sure that we have the flexibility that's needed there. Commissioner Moll, the two scenarios that the USGS ran for the groundwater study, one was shutting off all pumping. All pumping, domestic, irrigation, everything. And in a 100-year period of time, some of the basins didn't come back to 1990 levels. Some came back in 30 to 40 years. The groundwater study does talk about the majority of the water in our basin is paleo water, receiving very, very little recharge. So getting back to, historical levels or pre-European settlement, going to be tough. Going to be real tough. I just thought I'd share that. But all in all, the last thing I leave you guys with is two things, actually. One, there's a complex water position that we funded in 23 that still hasn't been hired in the basin. If you guys could work with the department to try to get that position hired, is there going to be even more needed to work with this community as we work through this? And secondly, can volunteer agreements replace the contested case process? It's hopeful, or maybe hopeful is not the right word. I just believe they have to run in a parallel process. Even if the community, which I believe we will be successful in some volunteer agreements in some sub areas, we're not going to get 100% buy-in. So there might be a path where some will be regulated through a contested case and some will be self-regulated through a volunteer agreement. And as Tim said, all good intentions don't always see the finish line. So there needs to be some regulatory backstop there too. Lastly, Commissioner Reeves, it's been a pleasure to get to know you, work with you, and I'll still bug you from time to time. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative Owens. Any questions for Mark? No? Okay, thank you. So we'll go to Chris Hall from the Water League, please.
Testing 1, 2. Chair Quimps and Commissioners, for the record, I'm Christopher Hall, Executive Director of Water League. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments. I really appreciate it. And thank you for coming to Central Point. House Bill 2192 is the 1991 law that brought the Critical Groundwater Area process into the Administrative Procedures Act. Bill Young, OWRD Director, when HB 2192 passed, discussed the endemic problems related to critical groundwater area designations and water use controls. This was well over 30 years ago. He said, and I quote, and this was in his testimony before one of the committees, quote, the imposition of critical area designation and controls is often resisted by groundwater users within the affected area. This is understandable, given that the controls reduce or totally eliminate pumping by some appropriators. That in turn may reduce property values and personal income. For these reasons, the decision to create a critical area is a difficult one. However, when the statutory criteria for declaration of a critical area exist, they indicate a resource that is out of balance and that will ultimately fail without corrective action by the department. Because of the ambiguous nature of the current statutes, legal challenges to such declarations are easily mounted. Historically, the challenges have focused predominantly on questions of procedure. Questions about technical data and interpretations are few. Delays caused by such legal challenges can be extreme. In the worst case, the Butter Creek Critical Groundwater Area, legal challenges delayed effective control of the resource for 16 years. During that time, overdraft and therefore water level declines continued unabated to the detriment of senior water right holders because of increased operating costs and to the jeopardy of the resource. The clarification in the law will not eliminate the right of any affected party to redress in the event of inadequate work by the department. However, if the process for critical area declaration can be rewritten in terms compatible with the APA, the focus on future challenges will be on the technical facts and the condition of the resource. In the final analysis, that is what matters in the protection of the resource and its appropriators. And that's end quote. No, just me. 32 years passed before the administrative rules for House Bill 2192 were finally written last year. No critical groundwater area designations were ever made during that time. Now that Division 10 rules are in place, Oregon can manage groundwater declines, and that's why we're here today. Water League supports, and I quote, the department's goal to stabilize groundwater levels at target water level trend of zero decline for the entire designated critical groundwater area, end quote. OWRD explains further, for the Harney Basin, the department is proposing to not define reasonably stable, as some areas of the basin are showing more than 50 feet of decline. Instead, the department is framing the discussion about goals for future groundwater level trends in the Harney Basin as the target water level trend, as we heard Tim talk about so eloquently. In fact, he took the words out of my mouth because that's his job, and he did a much better job than I will here. The logic of proposing to not define reasonable stable is really self-evident, since groundwater declines are already way past the point of a lawful requirement of being reasonably stable that's in ORS 537-525 subparagraph 7. In many areas throughout the Harney Basin, there are no reasonably stable declines. Critical groundwater areas exemplify regions where Oregon did not or could not implement the reasonably stable statute within a reasonable and lawful timeframe. The time when a critical groundwater area should have been designated in Harney Basin is long past due, and drawing out the timeline further obstructs the rule of law and harms the public health, safety, and welfare far beyond the limits of the present moment. OWRD says the time to achieve stabilized groundwater levels presents challenging policy decisions. Now that the APA procedures, now that the APA procedures are fully in place, we should honor the legislative intent of House Bill 2192 to streamline the critical groundwater area process by methodically and fairly processing the designation and contested case hearings without undue delay to stop a bad situation from getting worse. 7 other critical groundwater areas exist, and those communities adapted to their overpumping, and so will others in the present and the future. Thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions or comments for Chris? No. Conrad Fisher?
Yes, hi. Conrad Fisher with Water Climate Trust. My home is the Klamath Basin. I want to reiterate something we put in our earlier comments, which is that I'm hoping this commission and the state of Oregon and staff can embrace the goal, the additional goal of protecting interconnected surface water. This is already a legal mandate, I would argue, and this is very different than what was just presented to you. So preventing harm to surface water from groundwater use is not just about levels. There is an extensively studied basin in our watershed in the lower Klamath, the Scott watershed, where every year the groundwater level returns to where it started. But every summer it goes down, and some wells are actually dewatering the river. Some groundwater extraction is. So every place is different, but that is kind of the scientific complexity. And that is why just focusing on groundwater level decline over time is not the same as protecting interconnected surface water. And I'll just end by saying the rules before you focus very much on the law around the laws that focus on groundwater levels. They, I will argue, dismiss other laws where Oregon has an obligation to protect endangered species and tribal beneficial uses of in-stream flows. The state of Oregon does recognize tribal reserve rights in the Klamath Basin, although I would say they exist everywhere in the state. But as you move over to the Klamath Basin, this will become even more critical. You will need to figure out how to not adversely impact in-stream flows to which the Klamath tribes have an in-stream right effectively. But that should not be the only place it's considered. So the language I might propose is avoid adverse modification of interconnected surface water as a goal and a measure of success, or adverse modification of beneficial uses of interconnected surface water. This is some language we've proposed in the past. So I would just ask, is there a plan to deal with this? If anybody feels like answering, if not, I'll go sit down.
Responses?
Well, I'd love to continue the discussion with staff and help talk about logistics, because Oregon does have, it's not just me asking, Oregon already has a legal obligation under the Public Trust Doctrine, Endangered Species Act, and tribal reserved water rights.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes agenda item D. So we'll move to agenda item E, overview of water project grants and loans and irrigation modernization funding evaluation process. Morning, Kim.
Is the PowerPoint not on this one? Apologies, one moment. There was no folder. I've not looked at it all yet. Hey Adair, can you share the PowerPoint presentation?
Give me permission to share my screen.
Adair, can you share the PowerPoint? It's not going to let us. We need to do a bunch of sign-ins.
Yeah, I still don't have the ability to share them.
Well, while we are getting that set up, I can start with some introductions and what we're going to cover on the title slide. Does that sound good to folks? Cool. So good morning. For the record, I'm Kim Fritz-Ogren, and I manage the Planning, Collaboration, and Investment section at the Water Resources Department. Today, joining me virtually are three folks. That includes Adair Muth, who you've previously interacted with as our grant coordinator, but she was recently promoted to a new position of grant manager as we expand our grant team with all of our new grant programs. And then also we have representatives from DEQ and ODFW joining us. Jana Guzman from ODFW and Steve Perret from DEQ. These are folks who have worked with us on a number of initiatives, including place-based planning, but specifically they're going to talk about their role on the technical review team in evaluating these grants. We wanted to come and talk to you today because thank you. The evaluation system for water project grants and loans and irrigation modernization funding is lengthy, complex, and in some ways unique. It requires the coordination and work of a number of folks, including the department, our interagency partners, the applicants, and the commission. And so we thought it'd be really great to have a conversation about those roles, and specifically the department and the technical review team, or TRT, really want to make sure that as we bring information and recommendations to the commission, that they are providing you the information that you are interested in having to make a decision, and that you have confidence in what we're bringing today. And so we're asking for feedback on how we can improve that process. So these two funding opportunities fall under recommended action 13E of the IWRS, that we invest in the implementation of water resource projects. Next slide. So there's two funding opportunities we're going to talk about this morning. The first is water project grants and loans. It was established in 2013 by Senate Bill 839, and then underwent a lengthy rulemaking process with a number of subgroups in addition to a rules advisory committee. It can fund a wide variety of projects, water supply projects, that address in-stream and/or out-of-stream water needs. But most specifically, the outcomes that the fund is trying to achieve are public benefits in three categories: economic, environmental, and social cultural benefits. Next slide. The irrigation modernization funding is a new one-time pot of funds authorized by the legislature in 2023, and it also seeks to achieve those three public benefits, but is focused specifically on improving water use efficiency of irrigation systems. Next slide. So a little bit more about this unique pot of funding. It is intended to provide state match needed for a big chunk of federal funds that are currently available from a number of different federal entities. And in conversations with the legislature and when reflecting on how do we deploy these funds quickly, we are using the existing evaluation system for water project grants and loans as we evaluate those projects. Next slide. So that's where they are similar, and then here we're highlighting just a couple of key differences. When we talk about cost match for water project grants and loans, there is a statutory requirement for a dollar amount or a percentage of 25% cost match that can be in-kind or cash match. And the source of that cash match or in-kind match does not matter. Whereas for the irrigation modernization, they must have specific federal match from 3 different entities, some of which have already deployed those funds. Folks have, money in hand, federal money in hand, and they really need that state match. And then in some instances where the federal government is still working to deploy those funding opportunities. And then specifically per the authorizing legislation, we are directed to give priority to projects that legally protect in stream a portion of the conserved water, commensurate with the allocation of conserved water program. Next slide. So now Adair is going to talk in more detail about the process by which we evaluate these grants.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, Chair Quemps and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Adair Muth. And as Kim noted, we'd like to share with you today in more detail the application review process and the responsibilities of OWRD staff, the commission, and the technical review team, or TRT, during this process. Each have various responsibilities in the evaluation of applications during a funding cycle, which occurs over 5 to 6 months. The review process is lengthy, involved, and somewhat unique. On the screen, the graphic on the left-hand side of the screen shows the steps, starting with program development. So prior to offering funding cycles, the commission adopted rules to establish a system for scoring and ranking of projects as required by statute, and had the responsibility to design the minimum criteria for the project scoring and ranking system to meet target outcomes in ORS 541677. Per rule, OWRD was to set a minimum score for an application to proceed. It's important to note these steps that occurred during program development as they guide the application evaluation process and the next steps that we will discuss. So for any given funding cycle, the first step during the review process is OWRD receives applications. And per rule, OWRD staff review the applications for eligibility and completeness and return incomplete applications. We then work with the Legislative Commission on Indian Services to determine the affected tribes. We send the complete and eligible applications to all tribes, inviting comment on the applications, and then we indicate if the Legislative Commission on Indian Services identified their tribe as being affected by the project. We also post all complete applications on our website and hold a 60-day public comment period on the applications. The next step is the application evaluation. So our role during the application evaluation is to facilitate the evaluation of applications, as well as to serve on the technical review team and score and rank the applications. I'll note that grant staff do not serve on the TRT. This role is fulfilled by another OWRD staff member. For example, in the current funding cycle, our section's senior technical analyst is serving as our TRT member. During the application evaluation, the TRT, the technical review team, has several responsibilities. First, the TRT conducts the initial scoring and ranking of applications. They then use the total score of each project to rank all applications. And finally, they make funding recommendations to the commission based on their scoring and ranking. After the TRT makes its funding recommendation, OWRD posts this funding recommendation for another public comment period. We finally arrive at funding awards approximately 5 months after applications are received. Our role is to present the funding recommendations to the commission on behalf of the TRT, and the commission has 3 items at this step of the process. The first is to use the evaluation system that was established in rule to assign final scorings and rankings to the project. The second item is the commission is to award funding from the account to the projects that have the greatest public benefit and will best achieve the target outcomes. And finally, the commission is to make funding decisions at least twice a year. So after the commission decision, OWRD documents the ranking of all applications and makes it publicly available. We then enter into grant agreements with the award recipients and manage the grants. The final step in this process is evaluation and improvement. OWRD is to review the program on a biennial basis. We would like to acknowledge that our grant staff have been working to stand up several new grant programs over the past few years. So due to staff capacity and this other priority work, we have not completed this biennial review since 2021. I will note that we do evaluate the process after each funding cycle to see if there are improvements we can make on the next funding cycle. So now that we've gone through the entire process, we want to share a little bit more about the scoring criteria. So as noted previously, during program development, rules were adopted to establish a system for scoring and ranking projects, and the minimum criteria was designed to meet target outcomes. Statute specifies the public benefit questions that need to be evaluated and specifies that each public benefit category is to be given equal importance. In statute, there are 6 economic questions, 6 environmental questions, and 6 social cultural questions. For water project grants and loans and irrigation modernization, statute identifies that preference shall be given for projects that provide a measurable improvement in protected stream flows, and preference shall be given for partnerships and collaborative projects. During the scoring process, projects receive preference points for these items. For irrigation modernization only, as Kim had mentioned earlier, the statute identifies that priority shall be given to projects that legally protect a portion of the conserved water in stream, commensurate with the amount required under the approach described in the allocation of conserved water program. So for irrigation modernization projects, they receive additional preference points if they propose this in their application. A little bit about the scoring scale and the minimum score. So on the left-hand side of the screen is the scoring scale that is used to score each of the 18 public benefit questions. And as you can see, the scale ranges from 12, which is an exceptional benefit, to -3, a medium negative impact. A claimed benefit that is unsupported or unquantified in an application cannot receive more than a score of 1 or minor benefit. And as noted earlier, rule requires OWRD to set a minimum score for an application to proceed. OWRD set the minimum public benefit score of 7. A score of 6 or less means that only minor benefits are expected. And in setting a minimum score of 7, the department reasoned that an investment of public dollars for projects that have averaged $1.6 million in the past 5 years should result in more than a minor benefit. A project must receive a minimum score of 7 in all 3 categories: economic, environmental, and social cultural. So a little bit about the technical review team. I mentioned earlier the roles and responsibilities of that team, and the TRT is composed of the 7 agencies identified on the slide. We invited a few of those agencies to share more information about their reviews. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to Jana Guzman with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Adair. Good morning, Chair Klemps and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Jana Guzman. I'm the water planning coordinator for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I participated in the last 2 OWRD grant review cycles, and I'm also engaged in this current round. ODFW is grateful to be given the opportunity to share with you today what goes in an ODFW review. There are other agencies that participate in the technical review team. This presentation is ODFW's example, but the process is fairly similar among the agencies. In this presentation, I will look at the process of a review and the time commitments required at each step, what our grant review criteria are, the importance of a thorough review by a local and statewide staff, and what makes a good project versus a good application. Slide. This is a step-by-step process of how we conduct a review and the commitments at each step. It is a per application estimate, but please keep in mind, we receive an average of 8 to 10 applications per funding cycle. Also, the applications vary in length, but it can be upwards of 700 pages long each. In my initial review, I read an application and pull questions for local staff on the relevant subjects. I then send the application and questions to local staff to read, research, and evaluate to provide me written feedback. We will usually meet in person to discuss our findings and address any questions. I will then draft my comments to the 18 scoring criteria questions and determine my 18 draft scores. Finally, we have a 2 full-day TRT meeting filled with discussions of the applications. In conclusion, we estimate that regional staff will spend an average of 3 hours per application, and the lead reviewer will spend an average of 5 hours per application. So if we have 10 applications, that's 80 hours of ODF time spent total, not including the 2 full days of discussion. The time spent by each of the other 7 agencies is likely similar. Slide. ODFW's goal in reviewing grant applications is to provide unbiased, science-based feedback on the applicant's claimed statements of benefit. There are 3 general categories of the review questions that ODFW is lead on. This is because we are considered the expert in these areas. ODFW seeks to determine the following. Will the project improve or impact the restoration and protection of native fish species? Will the project result in improvements to ecological factors in the project watershed? And will the project actually restore water in stream? Slide. Regional staff receive many grant review solicitations throughout the year. It's common for many different agencies to provide their various expertise as part of review teams for grant funding. Local district staff involvement in the review process is critical to understanding the nuanced nature and complexity that some of these projects present us. ODFW's local staff will focus on the environmental benefits and specifically the claimed benefits to in-stream flow and aquatic resources. They will review each application, consider the merits, including how the project fits into other ongoing projects in the basin, and provide written comments for the lead reviewer to incorporate. Like I stated before, these projects are very nuanced. They require research into diversion locations, the impacts of swapping water between irrigation districts, the details of each of those water rights. We need to look at in-stream water rights, habitat conservation plans, seasonal and temperature considerations, as well as understanding the life history needs of native fish and other aquatic species. Given all these considerations, a thorough review from local agency staff is necessary. Without it, the review team would lack the unique perspective and expertise of each agency and therefore not have a clear understanding of the perceived versus realized benefits of the projects. Slide. It is important to express that although reviews do look at the quality of an application or how well it's written, I would like the commission to know that our comments are most importantly and primarily based on the actual realized benefits of the project itself, not just the quality of the application. For the environmental benefit of in-stream flow, legal protection of water in stream is the only guarantee of that benefit. Legal protection is not a requirement to receive funding, and therefore many applicants do not pursue this avenue. Many applicants will make a claim to public benefit, but upon further research, the claim is in fact unsubstantiated. Applicants will agree to conserve water in stream, but without any legal protection. Therefore, the claim is in fact not a strong benefit to the ecological system. They can also make claims to such a small amount of water that the benefits will be inconsequential. Nearly every project application we review claims an environmental benefit. It requires an expert review to really determine if that claim is substantiated. These are public funds, so the projects with substantiated claims warrant investment. I hope this sheds some light on what goes behind the scenes determining a project's final TRT score. We look forward to continuing our collaboration with our sister agencies and providing our expertise to protect and enhance Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats. We're enthusiastic about the process and utilizing public funds for those projects which provide environmental uplift as well as social and economic benefit. Thank you for taking the time to hear from us.
Chair Quimps and Commissioners, my name is Steve Perret. For the record, I work for the Department of Environmental Quality as an Integrated Water Resource Specialist. I want to talk a little bit today about what happens at the TRT meeting. I concur with Jana's assessment in terms of the time that goes into evaluating the applications up to the meeting. We came to sort of independently, came to roughly the same numbers, which is somewhat surprising to think about how much time and effort goes into evaluating each application, and then you multiply that by 7 agencies. It really adds up to a lot of staff time invested in these. I think each one of the TRT members that comes to the meeting and is involved in this takes this responsibility very seriously. And that's because these are public funds that require that there's corresponding public benefits. Representing Department of Environmental Quality, we bring some expertise from the water quality side of the lens. We provide that lens, but I also have experience working with Water Resources Department on water quantity. On the next slide. This is just me kind of thinking about how do I prepare for the meeting, and really, as Jana said, we come quite prepared with as much knowledge as we can gain and bring to the meeting. But really, the goal of the meeting, I would say, is to learn. We're there to learn what the other reviewers have learned in their review and speaking to their regional staff. And then secondly, our goal is to score the applications as accurately as we possibly can. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But we want to come to these meetings both confident in what we know, but open-minded to learn what we don't know, and learn from each other, share the information that we've gained, and as I said, score the applications as accurately as possible. And then when our role is done, to honor the process and let Water Resources Department handle the process after the meeting and interact with the applicants and all that. So that's honoring the process. At the meetings, we back one more. At the meetings, they're lively meetings. I'd say that to me they're both taxing because it can be up to 2 days of meeting time. They're taxing, but they're also very interesting. We're learning about these projects going on around the state that are really, a lot of them are very interesting projects, and we have to think about, are we achieving the goals of the program and spending the public's money wisely. Yeah, to the next slide. Thank you. These are some things we keep in mind. The scoring system does allow for some negative scores, which is interesting. And I think a person tends to want to look at everything in a positive way, maybe, but on occasion we do score some with some negative. And the scoring is really, I would say, a combination of the magnitude of the project's positive benefits and the likelihood or probability that the project will achieve those benefits. Those are things we keep in mind as we're ultimately doing the scoring. And the supporting evidence is one thing we use to help us with that. This is the criteria scale out of the guidance. And I wanted to go back to this because this is really what the TRT is about. And in the meeting, we're trying to get to the point where we can take our draft scores that we made before the meeting and ultimately turn those into final scores. And so we, as I said, we have to listen to each other, learn from each other, and be open to changing our score. Maybe we had something as a minor benefit. We had it scored as a 1. But after the discussion and hearing from the other TRT members, then we can think about whether we need to adjust our score on that question up or down and fine tune it. And we do this for each of the 18 public benefit questions on each application. And on the next slide, I just extracted a little bit of the guidance out here so you could see it. And this is, this is the level of detail we have to get to, trying to decide should something be and this is just for instance, should something be scored as a 3 or a 6 for a public benefit score? And we rely on the guidance that Water Resources Department has developed and try to make that judgment. It's just a professional judgment based on the information in the application and everything we've learned at both from our field staff and at the meeting from our other reviewers. My experience, and I've been involved in a number of these application reviews now over the last 6-8 years. My experience has been that the scores and the ranking that the technical review team comes up with, I feel, and that I hope that the commission will feel, you can have confidence in that there's been a lot of work and a lot of technical expertise put into the scoring and ranking, and that I hope will be something that the commission will lean on as you make your decisions with the other things that you have to consider. You have to consider public input, your own understanding of the applications, and the what you might hear from staff, and then from the technical review team. So that's one consideration. I hope you'll give it due consideration. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to take it from here. Once again, Kim Fritz-Ogren with the Water Resources Department. So as Steve and Jana shared, the TRT members do a lot of the work to really fully understand the likely public benefits of applications, and OWRD is facilitating this grant review process. So in the meeting, after the conversation, the review team members score each of the public benefit criteria in those 3 categories. And the department takes those individual scores, and then we combine them for a median public benefit score. With that median public benefit score, we add the median preference points to come up with the total score. So the total score for water project grants and loans is out of 240, though it would be very difficult to have a project that got up to that level because we're talking exceptional, really rare, huge benefit. The scores here are example scores, but they fall in line. Often the highest we've seen is about 120, and projects can get down into the 20s and 30s. And we rank the projects by the greatest public benefits score and call out those that do not meet that minimum score of 7 in any particular category, and do not forward those to the commission for a recommendation for funding. So next slide. So in sum, the technical review team makes a funding recommendation based on that public benefits score, and then we overlay what available funding what funding is available. And those projects that do not meet the minimum score in each of the 3 public benefit categories are not recommended for funding. Next slide. When this slide may look familiar, when we bring the funding recommendation to the commission, the TRT is only instructed to really consider that public benefit score, and the commission is asked to make a final funding decision based on a number of different things. That includes the public benefits, and they are required to give equal importance to each of those public benefit categories, but also look to see if the projects best achieve the target outcomes, and also consider factors of funding projects of diverse sizes, types, and geographic locations. And so next slide. With that overview of the process and getting into more detail of what we're doing in terms of gathering information and assessing the applications, we are really interested in feedback from the commission on how we might improve our scoring and ranking process. If there's information that you would like us to bring as you make those funding decisions, are there things that you think are working well, or just how can we improve the funding opportunities moving forward? So we're happy to take any questions or answer.
quite sure we'll have comments and questions.
Point of clarification, Kim, am I understanding correctly that there's one more funding cycle for the irrigation modernization part of this funding package?
Yeah, Chair Clemps, Commissioner Reeves, likely there will be more than one additional funding cycle. So we are currently in the middle of the second funding cycle for 2024. We anticipate bringing funding recommendations to the Commission for consideration in December. In this funding cycle, it's a bit of a flip than what we saw in the first funding cycle of 2024. In this funding cycle, we have I think it's 8 to 10 applications for water project grants and loans, and only one application for irrigation modernization funding. So there, even if that project is funded, there will still be more irrigation modernization funds. And so we're intending to offer another funding cycle, likely accepting applications in January. Well, having an application deadline in January. We're hoping to post those materials this fall, which is why we're asking for feedback now, so we can incorporate that.
And there's a time, do we have a time constraint with the irrigation modernization?
Yes, Chair Clemps, Commissioner Reeves, the funds are, the source of funds is lottery revenue bonds, and those have a 3-year shelf life after the bond sale. So 25 million of the 50 million was sold in the spring of 2024 and must be spent, as in dollars out the door, by the spring of 2027. And then another bond sale is anticipated for spring of 2025, and therefore those funds would need to be spent by the spring of 2028.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments?
I'm wondering, Kim, given the timeliness on the modernization projects, if there might be a less complicated rating process. I'm asking because I'm seeing that, especially with one application, it'll be fairly easy, but if we come up then with quite a few for the next round, maybe there's a way that the TRT group could find a way to rate them a little differently to make sure that we don't lose our opportunity for that funding.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Clemps. Commissioner Lee, it is our understanding in our conversations with the legislature that the intent was for efficiency and actually to help get the funds out the door more quickly to use an existing scoring and ranking process. If we wanted to do something differently, we would then need to take the time to figure out what that would be, and it actually would delay a funding cycle and getting funds out the door. That said, we are interested always in finding ways to reduce barriers for applicants to, get their foot in the door. We don't want to miss out on good projects because it's just too much of a burden to put together an application. So we're looking at ways on how can we help our applicants, how can we streamline things to reduce those barriers while also maintaining the integrity of the review process.
I was looking at House Bill 5030 and it didn't really have any requirement on these particular projects for a rating schedule. So I'd be interested to hear if we have some people signed up, if they have any ideas on that.
Yes, Chair Clemps, Commissioner Lee, I believe the statute references that the projects must achieve the public benefits that are listed in statute under the Water Supply Development Account, which also governs water project grants and loans. And I think there are some differences of opinion as to what that means.
Commissioner Reeves?
Kim, I noticed on the, is this better? Okay, thanks. On one of the charts you put up there, there were 2 red 6s. And I assume that's a reference to the June meeting where 2 of the projects we approved we essentially changed that scoring to 7 to meet the minimum and approved funding those packages.
Chair Clemps, Commissioner Reeves, there have been a number of funding cycles where we've had applications only achieve a public benefits score of 6 and not be recommended for funding. I would say that last June was the first time that the commission utilized its authority to revise the scores and fund those projects. But it's not uncommon for there to be some just a couple of projects that don't meet that minimum score.
Well, the reason I was asking about the irrigation modernization portion is because I think that is the first time we've exercised discretion to change a TRT score. And I feel like the nature of that funding and the kind of time constraints associated with it had something to do with that. Like we've never done it in the Water Project Grants and Loans program because that doesn't have I don't think we feel the urgency with that we did with that funding.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like the TRT does a really good job. I think this came from another, basically, concern. So,
Another motivation.
yeah, so I don't think there's anything well, I'm not going to be doing this, but from my, if I were.
Speak clearly.
I don't feel like I would, there's more that we're asking for from the TRT. I think they give us really good feedback. And like I said, this was an unusual situation.
Yeah, if I may, the same time constraints exist for the funds for water project grants and loans. And so if that is of interest and concern to the commission, that's helpful for us to know. So for example, in this biennium, there's $10 million for water project grants and loans. 5 million of the bonds were issued in 2024, and then another 5 million are scheduled for 2025. But those same time constraints exist on the dollars.
But we do have the expectation that that's going to be, that fund will continue to be funded as opposed to the irrigation. I mean, the irrigation modernization kind of dropped out of the sky, right? So I think, you can tell me if I'm wrong about that. Looks like my boss.
Chair Clemps, Commissioners, I think there's a key point of clarification. I'm glad that Kim got to the point around water project grants and loans. On the state side, it's the same, okay? I think the pressure all of you are referring to is actually about federal funding. So that's a little bit of a distinction, is that I think this funding was intended to be matched dollars. And so I think the pressure you were hearing wasn't actually about the state funding. So just note that in terms on the state side, it's set up the same way. To your point though, this is a temporary program, but that's not really the issue in terms of the time constraints. It's more about the federal side, I believe. Kim can correct whatever I said wrong there.
No.
And for the record, Raquel Rancière, Deputy Director, thank you.
Yes, I believe the desire to leverage those federal dollars, some of which, might expire and some of which actually have not been allocated yet.
Yeah, that's what I remember being the real driver of moving those forward this last meeting. You know, like you said, this the commission has never done that before, and it's not because we don't have trust in the TRT at all. And just going over everything that goes through with the process with all of these organizations that are part of the TRT, you know, we can tell that you put a lot of hours and a lot of thought and a lot of effort into making the best decision and using public dollars in the best way possible and distribute it across the state equitably. So I do appreciate the TRT, and I think this, for me, it feels like it was just a special case. And may not be the same way going forward. But I do appreciate a lot of the efforts that you make. Like if a applicant didn't quite make the mark, you will respond to them, let them know what they can do to make it better, and put them in line for the next funding cycle. And I think in this case that there was a lot of federal dollars that were on the table, and we were just trying to make sure that those got matched and they got their projects off the ground. So that's my recollection of it, and appreciate that process, that you do get back to those applicants. And then I think you said that you also allow them to make small changes to their application after it's been submitted, or is it just any changes will be observed in the next cycle?
Chair Clemps, Commissioner Smitherman, during the public comment period, applicants can submit supplemental information to their application for consideration. It's best, we really try to encourage them to get it into the application up front.
But if they're missing a component of the public benefit,
sometimes a
social
public support letter
piece,
gets in late.
yeah, then that's their opportunity to boost that score by bringing it to public comment period. Okay. I have a lot of notes here. Let me just check.
Commissioner Mull?
Oh, I'm not sure. Hold on. I think that was it. Oh, just, I know that it's laid out in statute, but I'm wondering if, a public benefit, a social, cultural benefit could be viewed as a project that's being done in a region that's an example to that region. And they don't often get the money to do those projects. And by obtaining and securing funding, it's an example to others within that region that they could do something similar and that it's attainable. So just as a thought on public benefit.
Yeah, Chair Clements, Commissioner Smitherman, that is already incorporated into the scoring criteria, and we have seen that play out where there's sort of that innovation or that like being that leader where others will follow. And it's really cool because that we've also seen that happen where after that first project was funded, we then had others come in the door from that place because they saw that it worked.
Exactly.
For example, in Wallowa County, that has happened.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Commissioner Mull, did you have a comment?
I've got a few comments and questions, if it's all right. First, thanks again for per usual helping us understand what you do. And quite frankly, apologies to Jana and Steve and others on the TRT if the decision we made in the June meeting made you feel like, well, what the heck? I mean, if you're just gonna recast our scoring, only knowing a little bit about it, what's our job? I can imagine hearing you now feeling that way. And I apologize because that's not a good position to be put in. Period. At the same time, we've talked about this for several years about just the difficulty. Let's go back to the very beginning. The people who designed this triple bottom line requirement. I mean, come on, it is incredibly difficult. The fact that we say that we have to not only show that we've never gotten a winning application with more than 50% of the total score, that's a sign that the total scoring criteria is probably not ideal. So you are dealing particularly with a very difficult situation, I think. And then when we look at the spread, that every time we've awarded grants and loans or you've had that spread of 100 to down to 30 or so. And the lowest ranked ones are just barely over the 777. And so this issue has come up, and I do think structurally in the scoring criteria, there's some reason for that and some reason to feel uncertain at our level what to do, because you gave us a very thorough report back in June, and I went back and looked at it, and somewhere in there's the reference that does talk to something that, Jana, you touched upon, the difference between a good project versus a good application. And so a request, which we've made in the past, in the summaries that come to the commission, there's often language that makes it sound like this was just not a good application. And we've asked the question, if it were a better application, if it were written better, would this be a good project? And my memory is, yeah, kinda, and that's why we've asked them to reapply. I've suggested this in the past, I suggest it again. Overall, just quick math, 6 state agencies in the TRT, 80 hours, some round number. we're probably looking at $50 to $60 to $70,000 of administrative time, maybe 10% overhead on our distribution of $5 to $7 million each round, which is reasonable. That's okay. Is there a way that we can have some of that administrative time in the field help applicants make stronger applications, especially in some of these regions that are less resourced, not the Deschutes Basin, which has that history? So again, looking for ways to do that. But back to the report that we get, if it's really, I don't know, that clarity around good project versus good application. If it's a good project, it's just not a strongly written application. It seems to me that it is going to continue to be in our prerogative, and I feel like we should say, you know what, based on what we hear, we're going to kick up and get it above the 7 so we can fund it. I think that I think there's reason for doing that. And then one other comment based on some of the feedback. There was a letter from some of the conservation groups back in April about the irrigation modernization grants and about priority accounting. And their interpretation is that when the legislature said that anything that permanently puts water in stream should get priority, it shouldn't just get a bump in the number of points, but it should actually raise to the top, which I think is a really interesting argument. However, the way it's written with the triple bottom line, I think sometimes we're conflating public benefit with only one of the 3 public benefits. And we have a situation where all of the TRT are representing sort of those different public benefit sectors. And I think, again, the difficult reality of the grant program is it's designed to, on the positive side, sort of bring everybody together, bring every program together so that it touches on those public benefits in those 3 areas. I think in the scrum of decision-making, it pits the different sectors against each other. In the way that the groundwater allocation has pitted this housing goal that the governor has against in-stream water and groundwater. And I would hope that a grant program like this could be implemented. The design is there, but if we could implement it in a way that doesn't pit competing factors, but really brings people together to say, hey, what can we do creatively? And get some outside the box innovative grant applications. Because right now, I think in total, we continue to see relatively an undersubscribed program. We don't get that many applications for the amount of money that's available. I feel like, to Commissioner Smitherman's point, if we could do some things to make the entryway into this world a little bit less intimidating, we'll all be better served. Thanks.
If I may respond.
You may.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that feedback and the feedback that you've provided for a number of years that we've worked to incorporate to the extent possible. We can definitely work to improve our evaluation summaries and providing that information and not just making it seem like, oh, they didn't do a nice application and so they're not recommended for funding. And I wanted to call out that piece of investing that time up front and helping folks with their projects. That's something amongst the agencies we discussed as well, because that technical assistance up front can be that space for improving projects, helping folks, and getting to that more collaborative spirit that you were speaking to.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an ability for us to direct the agency to make grant program dollars available to help TRT member agencies do some of that, not just to meet for the review, but to actually spend time with applicants, pre-application time. I would certainly be strongly in favor of that if we have the budgetary authority to do something like that.
Yeah, Chair Klemps, Commissioner Mall, the account does give us the authority to use the funds for administration of the program. Unfortunately, well, I shouldn't add that, in my opinion, unfortunately, but the type of dollars that have been allocated for the fund have a restriction that don't allow us to use them for staff time.
Unfortunate.
Quick follow-up.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner.
So that made me think a pre-application webinar meeting. Is that currently happening, or is that something that we could look into doing and providing a forum or opportunity for applicants to join and ask the questions they need to get answered to have a good, solid application.
Yeah, Chair Clemps, Commissioner Smitherman. So over the years, we've done online webinars, attended various conferences, and have talked about, once we're more staffed capacity, having what I call a grant roadshow, and maybe partnering with our sister agencies to talk about different funding opportunities, right? And I've also talked with some of our interested parties about attending more of their meetings where they're, already have a gathering of folks who are interested in funding, and we can come talk about our program and their projects.
I think that's a great idea. And I know it takes time, money, effort, but if we could make that happen and make it more attainable for some of these folks and regions to get the money they need to move projects forward, I think that's a benefit to look into. Thank you.
I have a few comments, Kim. I think it seems to me there's some language in past evaluations about food systems.
Yes,
And-
one of the public benefit criteria.
Yeah, and I don't think that adequately captures the in-stream flow benefit. That rivers are food systems that produce fish that are healthy food sources and enjoyed not just by tribes, but Oregonians in general. And I think that's not explicitly captured in the system. That's a tremendous value. I think this is a good check-in. I think the review team does a great job. What I'm more interested in looking forward is if, since, as you pointed out, we've been doing this since 16, we do biennial updates or reviews, but I think that in 2025, doing a 10-year review of, what's been accomplished in terms of outcomes, what's been the distribution of awards in terms of issues and geography, what process recommendations do you see, and what outreach and education recommendations do you have to improve the system going forward? And then all of that, I think, could link well into implementing an updated IWRS and other opportunities that are likely going to be coming to the Columbia Basin region in the near future. So I know that's more work, some kind of 10-year status report about how the use of these funds has turned out, I think could be very useful for the future commission and the staff.
Thank you, Chair Clemps. I think, making a biennial review look at a broader time frame, I think fits within the statute and works well.
Bigger sample size. Thank you.
May I ask
Commissioner
time for another follow-up question? I'd love, especially Jana and Steve, and if you can represent other TRT members. Have you experienced potential applicants coming to you pre-application period? Say, hey, Jan, I got this idea. And could we get together with someone from DEQ and someone from ODFW and just sort of get out in the field and talk about it? Is that happening? Because I know, being on the application side in other venues, that the webinars and things are great, but the real sort of due diligence is you contact the agency folks that are on the ground who can give you some of that initial feedback before you even write the application. And I'm curious if you're seeing that, if it's grown over time, or you're not seeing it, or is there a problem?
Chair Quemps and Commissioner Moll, this is Steve Perrett. I have those conversations about projects informally with people, particularly in the place-based planning groups, but that's prior to an application. These are not active applicants. We've been advised not to speak to applicants. But, in my work with place-based planning groups, we're talking about potential projects. And with my familiarity with the water project grants and loans, I could speak to them about the triple bottom line need for the projects to produce benefits in those three categories and that sort of thing. And as well, we help promote the upcoming application deadlines and within our agency and within those place-based planning groups.
Just clarify, you said you've been advised not to speak to applicants?
Yes, once an application's been submitted to the Water Resource Department, we are advised by water resource staff not to interact with those applicants once they've submitted a application.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
If I may, Chair Quemps, Commissioner Mall, that is done in the interest of equity.
Yes, I just thought you meant, I interpreted it as prior to application.
Oh, no, prior, all the conversations, please do. And I know for WRD, folks will reach out to Adair and grant staff for feedback, and then also coordinate with our local water masters as well. And so that speaks to Jana's, the importance of having that local input, because they're often the ones who have had conversations with the project proponents.
Yeah, also Chair Clemson and members of the commission, we do actually have it happen fairly often where they reach out to local staff. So the local district fish biologist, for example, will get reached out to, and he could do a site visit. And so they are more aware. That's what I mentioned in my presentation, that they're aware of what projects are going on in the region. They're regionally aware. And so that's when I reach out to them and they provide their feedback.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wolf?
Yes, I was just wondering, like in the case of my application, as having been awarded some money before I was a commissioner, in my situation, some of the stuff that Commissioner Mall was referring to as maybe having the department do is being performed by entities such as the Freshwater Trust and Trout Unlimited, and those people are gaining expertise as the program exists longer. And so what percentage of the applications that you see do you feel has an environmental facilitator trying to get those applications up to a level that meets its potential?
Chair Quemps, Commissioner Wolf, I could not give you a percentage with any certainty. There are a number of projects where it is a partnership where a nonprofit or other organization is the one doing the administrative work to get the grant, and they're coordinating and facilitating with the landowner. But I'd have to get back to you on a specific breakdown because it does vary from year to year.
I have a quick question or comment on, getting the technical review team and or folks out in the field with these grants. I remember that from some of my OWEB experience, that to actually be able to go out and see the project on the ground in that time period between you've got the application and before you have the technical review team meeting, to actually have time to go out and view the projects on the ground. I don't know if you guys have that opportunity or not. It does help when you're trying to score something, like what are they trying,
Yeah, Chair Clemps, Commissioner Kahara, I believe with OWEB, they have specific designated regional staff whose job is to go and investigate those projects on the ground and report back to and provide that perspective to the review team members. We've not contemplated that because of the time involved and how we might do it for 10 applications across the state. But I know at WRD, we are prioritizing getting folks out in the field just to have a good understanding of various projects. They might not be specific to that project.
Right.
But there is getting that on the ground experience is helpful.
Yeah, and I don't know if those kind of things get invited, the other technical review team members get invited to, like, hey, we're coming out to so-and-so or this area. Are you interested, or are you available to come along and see what some of the things have been done or being contemplated?
Yeah, I think we could work on extending that invite to our interagency partners. And I don't know, Jana and Steve, if you get those invites, or it sounds like local staff definitely do, but I don't know if TRT members do.
Just local staff, I would say. But yeah, like Steve was saying, we're advised not to really, after the application is submitted, to go in further discussion to create the equity unless we saw every single applicant in person. But it's more feasible for regional staff to do that.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for a good report. I think we'll move on to public comment now. And we have 3 commenters, Stephanie Tidwell and Conrad Fisher from Water Climate Trust, and then April Snell from the Oregon Water Resources Congress.
Good morning. Again, my name is Stephanie Tidwell. I am with Water Climate Trust and the Oregon Water Justice Alliance. And I have to say I'm very encouraged by looking at this and the direction that you're going. One of our organization's concerns for quite some time has been that there's far too much environmental water funding that doesn't actually end up in a net positive benefit for the environment. And having standards for, ensuring that, 25% at minimum goes into in-stream flows is frankly a good bit further ahead than other states around here. And so I'm very encouraged to see that. I would say that the way that these things are done matters though, and I'm still learning a lot about this process, and you may already be doing this. I'm interested in digging in more to understand some of the details around how these scores are arrived at, because these on-the-ground inspections also matter. And I understand that there's some kind of possibly seemingly odd to me restrictions on what staff can and can't do. But my recommendation, if there's any way to ensure each application needs a site inspection by someone before being approved. That's not to quote Reagan, but to quote Reagan, I think it was, trust but verify. So that is a really important part of that. And I also agree with Commissioner Mole around some of the triple bottom line stuff. Could use some better clarification perhaps, because this is about environmental water funding. And yes, of course, we want sustainable agricultural industries to feed us, but we also want, them to not be harming the water. And so I think even some clarification in the directions on the applications around economic benefits in particular could be helpful, because clearly, yes, fisheries recovered provide economic benefits. It's a little bit harder to quantify than jobs, though, so I don't know how much wiggle room you have in terms of what those definitions are, but I do feel like when this is environmental funding, that there could be a little more flexibility in terms of the economic benefit components of it. And then, I think that the monitoring component of it in terms of ensuring that water is actually going back into stream, again, in terms of what are the mechanisms there to actually provide verifiable accounting rather than a trust us sort of situation. But, overall, first glance, I think that most of this makes sense. I just think that some more detail, it's easy to find on some of these more subtle issues would be helpful for making good decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Conrad again with Water Climate Trust. I'm from the Klamath Basin, as I said earlier. I'm here again with the same goal, which is to encourage you to take steps necessary to protect in-stream flows for endangered species and also river-dependent communities. And how we allocate money is very, very important to that goal. Ending in 2016, I was part of a group that published a report titled Measuring Cost Effectiveness of Environmental Water Transactions. If you Google that name, you'll find it. It also has recommendations for funding agencies. And we basically commissioned economists and water accountants, you might say, to evaluate all environmental water transactions we could find throughout the state of Oregon. There was only one basin, the Deschutes, where data necessary to evaluate the impact on in-stream flows was even collected. Despite that fact, throughout the state, there was a lot of public money thrown at projects that professed to restore environmental flows, but the data wasn't there to prove whether or not they did. So I think there are ways that this committee and all of us can avoid those pitfalls of the past, and the recommendations of that report, I would encourage you to check that. And a lot of it's just about available data and not taking the word of applicants because they check the box saying it benefits flows. One of the most common methods of creating fuzzy math is inflating a baseline. I, water user or freshwater trust, say, historically we've used 40 CFS. If you give us $6 million for a pipeline, we're gonna use 30 CFS. Therefore, we've conserved 10. You gotta verify those things because a lot of times there are inflated baselines. A lot of times water rights are bigger than anything that might imaginably be necessary to serve the purpose or the acreage that somebody has. So there's a lot of ways to create fuzzy math or accounting to claim an environmental benefit where it doesn't exist. The biggest thing I guess might ask is, could you amend the funding guidelines, somehow have a mechanism so projects that are actually gonna harm environmental flows for endangered species get tossed out. So you will probably get applications you maybe have in the past that say we're gonna help fish, but actually they reduce flows. In the California side of the Klamath Basin, specifically Scott Shasta watershed, this has happened time and time again with funds that are earmarked by the California legislature for stream flow enhancement have actually reduced stream flows. And this happens, the most common example is when you basically plug the leaks in water conveyance, where does that conserved water go? With the conserved water statute, the intent behind it in Oregon, I think Oregon is much further along in the thinking of this. But if you're gonna allocate money for infrastructure improvements and don't do this proper accounting, it will most likely, in most cases, result in less water for fish. Because in most parts of Oregon, there are paper water, unexercised rights, there are junior rights down the line. So you can serve here, it's gonna get taken out somewhere else. And this happens time and time again. I call it being soaked up by paper water rights. So you can serve, but it's soaked up by what was previously paper or unexercised water rights that now there's water available for. We have documents that kind of detail all of the pitfalls. And then beyond first do no harm, let's do our best to dedicate as much water in stream. I heard in the presentation, it's not a requirement that we legally dedicate the water in stream. If someone is claiming benefit, I don't want to say that's bad, but if you don't go through some mechanism, whether it's a third-party oversight, and it probably shouldn't just be on the staff on this committee who has a very limited amount of time. It might need to be whoever in the state of Oregon is responsible for approving in-stream dedications legally, even if it's not going to result in a permanent dedication or a dedication, at least go through the same water accounting process. So first do no harm, dedicate conserved water to environmental flows, and then finally it's provide benefits greater than required by law. A lot of rivers don't have in-stream flow requirements, but conceivably if you're paying someone to leave water in a river that already has an in-stream flow requirement, there's the question of, are you paying them to comply with the law? Or if you're paying someone to use less water in a watershed that doesn't yet have an in-stream flow requirement, you can stipulate, and there's been talk about this elsewhere, that if and when there's an in-stream flow requirement, this extra water taxpayers have paid for will be additive to that. So there are ways to ensure that this public money gets a benefit for the public and in the form of in-stream flows that is greater than required by law. And then the final is going back to my example of places where there are water rights are bigger than what is actually necessary. Oregon law already says you shouldn't waste water. So if a right is bigger than is necessary to achieve a stated goal, the water right holder technically should not be paid to go down to what is reasonable. That's just kind of already required. So if you're paying for additional water to a stream, it shouldn't be just paying them to comply with the prohibition against waste and unreasonable use. That's it. I'll be quiet there, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about this report. We published it in 2016. It really hasn't been circulated, but these principles apply not just to Oregon funding agencies, federal, anybody whose goal is to restore in-stream flows or at least not harm in-stream flows. These fundamental water accounting principles can and should be applied. Thank you.
Thank you. April Snell. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, April Snell, Executive Director with the Oregon Water Resources Congress, representing irrigation districts and similar ag water suppliers. First off, I want to thank Kim and Adair and the overall Water Resources Department staff for their efforts, not only on today's presentation, which I thought was very informative, but overall on these various funding programs to not only implement them, but continue to look at how we can make them better. And as you guys have discussed, there are many ways where maybe we can make some improvements. So a few things I want to mention is the comments that I'm going to give today are going to be both specific to the regular water supply grants and loans program as well as the irrigation and modernization program. I was directly involved in the Senate Bill 839 process. I did not write that language. That was the product of political sausage making, which is why we have statutory language that maybe is not as good as it could be. And I think that is true from a variety of perspectives. We can't change that without going back to the legislature, and I don't think there's an appetite to do that. There was 2 task forces, which I served on both, and I also served on the Rules Advisory Committee along with Kimberly Priestley here from Water Watch. That took a lot of time, and those rules are also fairly rigid, and given the backlog of rulemaking that the department has, I don't know that there's an appetite to try and fix some things there. However, I do think that maybe there are some things in rule and statute that could be changed to make things better, but there's also some areas where maybe there is a little bit of flexibility on that. But going back to the Senate Bill 839 and that related process, a large part of our conversation in those meetings was about above ground storage, which is a component of that program that does require seasonally varying flows and in-stream water. Only one district project has utilized that. That was for a dam increase. It wasn't for new storage. And it is unlikely, at least in the near term, that any entity that I'm aware of is going to be applying for that. But because there was a lot of discussion around storage, which is a very politically sensitive topic, I do think that there maybe were some areas where we didn't get into as much discussion as would have been helpful. The scoring and ranking was one of those. So while the statute and the rules are very clear that there needs to be a scoring and ranking process, the specific score is not. So there is some flexibility there. And it is something where, I should mention that the staff from WRD that were involved in the rulemaking are no longer with this agency, but there was dispute at the end of our process about the proposed scoring that was put forward that was never actually went through the RAP process. And that did include the component of having a negative score. I'm not aware of any other funding process that has a negative score. Most just have a 0. And now that that's been increased to have even more negative, there's a sense, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the TRT process because I've long felt that that's been part of the issue, and the presentations today confirmed that, and Commissioner Mull's comments about, it seems like there's an overemphasis on one particular benefit as opposed to the suite of the 3 required benefits. And yes, we need to make the applications better so they're more articulately hitting upon each of those things, but it is something where having negative scores, frankly, is offensive to applicants, but it's also something that's not consistent with other funding processes. I will also say that, and I know other folks are aware of this, but nothing in funding a project takes away from any specific agency's rules or laws about water rights and permit reviews. And so the notion that any of the projects that you have funded have led to damage to in-stream flows is completely unsubstantiated. That would be considered injury in most instances, which you guys know would not be something that can fly. I do really appreciate your guys' comments today. I think it would be great if members of the TRT are able to visit projects after they are funded. For our projects, which are primarily piping of open systems, there's almost always a groundbreaking ceremony afterwards, and various opportunities that I think would be great. And I do plan to follow up with leadership from the other agency directors to both discuss what I think is some inconsistency in the way that the scoring and ranking criteria is being implemented, which is not in rule or statute, but also encouraging them to get their folks out. I do understand and appreciate the need to have separation when those projects are actually being considered for funding. But once they're out, let's show people what we're talking about. And I think that would be helpful in a lot of ways. When it comes to the barriers in the existing program, there are some that, again, one that is in rule and statute, but I want to flag because it is going to lead to some additional conversations in the future, is there is language around water management and conservation plans, which are largely voluntary for irrigation districts. They are required for municipalities. When that language got finalized, it inadvertently captured ag water suppliers as if you have ever done a plan, you are hereby forever required to have that plan updated and current, which means that if you've never had an ag WMCP, which is a great tool for a variety of reasons, you could apply for funding and be just fine. But if you've ever had one and it's not current and updated, which currently the Water Resources Department, there is a bit of a backlog in processing those, then you will not be able to even apply. Even if that plan is sitting on somebody's desk, ready to be potentially approved, that application will be denied. And that has happened. And as a result, projects have then had to go for direct appropriations to the legislature. That same interpretation now applies to the irrigation modernization funding. And so that does mean that there's probably going to be some projects that we anticipated would be seeking that money that are now going to have to seek other funding sources or be delayed. That's not something that Kim and I can change because it's pretty clear in there, but I think that's an unfortunate barrier there. There are some other opportunities, as I mentioned, for things that we can improve. But when it comes to the irrigation modernization funding, as Kim mentioned, there's only one project that applied, which is a factor of, in this last cycle, factor that it's during irrigation season, which is super busy. And so I'm very pleased on the proposed timing that Kim has for getting this third and likely final round out, which would match up with when folks will have more time to do that. So I do anticipate that you're going to have a number of applications for that third round. The time sensitivity of that fund is exactly as was stated by Kim and Ms. Rins here, as far as the federal funding on the table will not be there forever. However, it is important to note that, and Kim alluded to this, some of the entities, particularly Bureau of Reclamation and some other funding that's tied up in congressional appropriations, it's been slower to come out. But we're really hopeful that that will line up with the January deadline to where we'll be able to hit that sweet spot. But the legislature will be convening in January, and there will be discussions both about this particular issue as far as federal funding that we need to leverage as a state, which I will mention not only includes the type of projects that you guys have already seen, but also includes other federally funded projects that currently don't have state match. For example, specific funding for fish passage and fish screening, some Department of Energy type projects, renewable energy, floating solar, things like that. So I anticipate there'll be more conversations specific to that, but also appropriations for this agency as a whole and appropriations for the now place-based planning fund, the feasibility study program, and the regular water supply grants and loans program. We have always supported all three of those funding sources, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to do so. But I also want to mention that this is the Water Resources Department, and your charge is much broader than simply a narrow interpretation of a public benefit. And part of the reason why we were seeking the funding under 839 and this new irrigation modernization funding is there is no other funding source at the state level for irrigation districts and agricultural water users to access to improve their aging systems. There are a variety of other funding sources that are specific to in-stream protections for in-stream flows. And I think that's important to note. And it's also important to make sure that we help continue to improve this process as we go forward. So again, I really appreciate the efforts of the commission and the staff. And lastly, I'll say it was intentional in the 839 process that the commission has the final decision and can make adjustments as needed. I would like to hope that you don't have as complex of a situation as you did in the June meeting going forward, but that was intended that it would come to you, and so really appreciate your willingness to take that on. So with my last bit, since I don't plan on speaking again, I also want to recognize and acknowledge Commissioner Reeves for her service on the commission. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
We have Kimberly Priestley next, please.
Good morning, Chair Quemps, members of the commission. My name is Kimberly Priestley, and I'm here representing Water Watch of Oregon. I did not come with prepared statements, but I just wanted to respond to a few comments that were made today. I will keep it brief. First of all, I do want to thank the department and all the other agencies for their, hard and thorough work in reviewing these applications. It's been a little over 10 years since this program has been in place, and there were some rough spots in the beginning, but kudos to the agencies, because I think we've smoothed those out, and, we really appreciate the very thorough reviews and think it's incredibly valuable to the final decision of the commission. So I want to thank you there. I did, to Jan's question earlier, I did just want to note that Water Watch and Jan's question regarding the irrigation modernization sort of scope. Water Watch and a number of other conservation groups did negotiate the language that was in the 2023 bill, and we agree with comments of the department both at the June meeting and today's meeting that the intent was that the projects go through the 839 process, including the ranking. We have testimony into the legislature outlining all this, but just wanted to note that our interpretation is the same as the department's. And then on that point, I did want to just briefly touch upon why the ranking is important from our perspective. I think as we heard from a previous commenter, not all efficiency projects are created equal, and some can have negative impacts. And I think I'll use the Deschutes as an example. And I'm using it as an example because most of the projects we see coming forward from the Deschutes are actually really good projects, and they're putting 100% of the water in stream. But I'm going to use them as an example if they didn't do that. So say that they came forward with an application just to shore up supply and didn't go through the Conserved Water Project Act to put water in stream. So in the Deschutes, you've got a situation where roughly half the water that's going through the canals is lost to the aquifer. And then that water pops up, it recharges into the system around Lake Billings, Chinook. And so in 2001, USGS found that, equated that to roughly 400 CFS. So before, there has been some piping since then, so it's less now, but let's just use that number. So water going through the canals, overall losing 400 CFS a year, but it was popping up in Lake Billings, Chinook to meet both tribal rights and also in-stream water rights. And so if, again, some of the projects are coming in to put, use the Conserved Water Act, which will get water in stream, some are not. And so for those that are using the Conserved Water Act, the benefits in the Deschutes are you have benefits in the summer months to the middle Deschutes in the form of live flow, but then you have you have no impact to the lower Deschutes. So in other words, you're not creating a negative effect or a positive effect. It's just sort of neutral. But if an applicant comes forward with an efficiency project that does not go through the Conserved Water Act, say just to shore up supply, then you lose that water that's sinking into the aquifer and popping up downstream. And so there not only would not be a benefit for the middle Deschutes, but there would be a negative impact on the lower Deschutes. And that's where, I think I'm just using this as an example to show that, the ranking really is important, because some irrigation projects are fantastic. Some do lead to harm to the resource. So I guess that's just my example. And then I guess the other point there is, I think that's also a really good example of the department's use of negative scoring, because in the case where there would be an impact on the Lower River in-stream water rights and Warm Springs tribal right, in our mind, that really should be scored and be part of the overall ranking. Anyway, I guess, again, I just wanted to respond to some of the comments, and I wanted to commend the state for their hard work on this and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you. And thanks again to the staff for the great report. I think we can take a break and reconvene at 11. Is that good? And then we'll try to get back on track. We saved a little bit of time yesterday, but let's take a break and reconvene at 11, please.
Hello. Good morning again, Chair Quemps and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Adair Muth, and be presenting the City of Silverton feasibility study grant inflation increase, and this is an action item.
You're good to go, Adair.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I apologize, I couldn't see the room for a moment, so I wasn't sure if you all were there and it was quiet. So just a quick reminder what feasibility study grants are. The purpose is to provide funding to evaluate the feasibility of a water conservation, reuse, or storage project. So in June of 2023, the commission awarded a feasibility study grant to the City of Silverton for their Silverton Aquifer Storage and Recovery Feasibility Study for $250,000. Quick reminder of what that study was for. So initially, the City of Silverton completed first phase of their feasibility study in 2021, feasibility study grant dollars, to identify the best potential locations for ASR. They came back to ask for a second phase to drill exploratory wells at 2 locations and then complete redesign level plans of infrastructure and determine cost estimates for the best location. In July of this year, the city contacted us to request that we increase their grant award by $25,000. And the reason for this request is that the cost of well drilling has increased significantly since they first proposed the project. The bids that they received were $300,000 more than anticipated when they applied for the grant. In part to make up for this cost, they have narrowed the scope of their study to look at just one preferred location, drill just one test well instead of 2. And the city has committed to an additional $25,000 in cash match to meet the required match, the 50% match requirement of feasibility study grants. We evaluated their request. We looked at our available program budget for feasibility study grants. We looked at the compliance of the grantee and the justification for this requested increase. And based on our evaluation, we do support allocating these additional funds to the city. So the alternatives that we would like to present to you today is number 1, adopt the funding recommendation contained in table 1 of this report to increase the Silverton Aquifer Storage and Recovery Feasibility Study Grant Award by $25,000. Number 2, adopt a modified funding recommendation. Or 3, decline to increase the grant award for the Silverton Aquifer Storage and Recovery Feasibility Study. The director recommends number 1. And with that, my presentation is very brief today. Help make up for getting a little behind on schedule, but I'm happy to take any questions. And I'll note that Corey Misley, the city manager of the City of Silverton, was hoping to be here today, but he had to run to another meeting at 11, so he apologizes. He couldn't make it, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions from the commission, please? Commissioner Mall.
Could you put that original slide up that shows what the original grant award and cost was? So my question is, if it was just the increased costs of a 10% increased cost over the total, 50K, 25K, that's reasonable. But if you're saying they also now can only draw 1 of what was to be 2 test wells for that same increased amount, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, originally the cost estimate was $500,000 total to do 2 wells. When they got the bid, it was $800,000 to do 2 wells. So now they're looking at doing one well for $550,000.
Did they consider asking us for $175,000 and matching that with 175 to drill two?
Yeah, sorry, Chair Cramps, Commissioner Mall. Thank you for the question. They also, when they got that cost, when the bid, they took a closer look at the project as well, and they determined that the second site that they were going to drill that test well actually isn't a preferred site to eventually develop ASR. So while they could test it, it wasn't a great location to develop it in the future anyway. So they realized that one test well was in the best of interest, and then they wouldn't have to come up with the additional match as well.
I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, if we approved something originally on the assumption that there was going to be two tests to study, and now we're putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. Is there some risk that you could have $550,000 that leads to nothing, and not only no ASR nor learning, which I think, obviously making huge assumptions here, but that seems like a pretty significant shift. Do you all have any concerns about that?
Chair Clements, Commissioner Mall, we had a conversation about that, right? We were thankful. We don't want to invest dollars in a location that isn't likely to lead to a project. So it's great that the city could examine that and make that determination before they invested and the state invested dollars into that space. But generally, when we're looking and managing the grants, we are working with the applicants to make sure that they are doing fully what they said that they were going to do and what was funded by the commission. But we think in this instance, it makes sense, and there still is that potential for ASR in that one location. And it's worth then the increased grant amount. I'll also note with feasibility study grants, part of the purpose is to determine whether a project is feasible, and sometimes the answer is no.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Lee?
Yes, I would move approval of alternative one, the staff funding recommendation for the $25,000 for the Silverton ASR project.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Commissioner Kahara. Okay, any discussion? Commissioner Mall, your vote, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Kahara?
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf?
Yes.
Commissioner Smitherman?
Yes.
Chair Reeves?
Yes, Chair Quinn.
Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So thank you for the work on this, and it passes unanimously.
Chair Grants, our camera is frozen again, and we need to reboot. I'm so sorry, but could we take another 5?
Another 5-minute break. Take 5. Dave
Noticed
Brubeck,
it
Quartet.
flashing over there. Flashing. I'll swap it out for the other owl.
I just turned off the audio on this
Okay, we're back on with the camera. We'll reconvene, please. So our next agenda item is H, Commissioner comments and farewell to Commissioner Reeves. I would like to suggest we break that up, so if commissioners want to make comments, we do that first and get that out of the way for all of us, and then do our farewell to Commissioner Reeves after that, rather than lumping them by each commissioner. So commissioner comments, please. I'll start with Commissioner Mall.
Thanks, Chair. Just really one experience that makes me think again of the IWRS and strategic planning work to do. In September now, so early August, I was a part of a coalition of Oregon Land Trusts organized tour of the drinking watershed for the cities of Reedsport and Gardner. And it's Clear Lake. If you're running down Highway 101, you actually cross over it. And the city has the opportunity to acquire about 380 or so acres of forest land that's currently owned by a commercial real estate investment trust. And in doing so, then they would control, have stewardship control of the entire drinking watershed. So it was a really neat opportunity to see something that I think is gaining steam throughout Oregon and throughout the West. And it's August. Thankfully, it was a little overcast. But what was memorable was in comments there on the site up in the forest, a couple of pretty conservative legislators who are in attendance who spoke very openly about climate change and the reality of what climate change has done to make the wet West Side a fire-prone environment, and how fire then leads to drinking water vulnerabilities and those sorts of things. And I guess the tie-in for me is that urgency, to hear that urgency from, I think, legislators that maybe 5 or so years ago would not have dared to mention climate change, is a sign of how much things have changed on the ground, in the water, and quite frankly, I think culturally, politically. And to me, that's all the more reason when we open up work on the IWRS again to revisit something that I think has been missing, which is a real sense of urgency. That, again, as we spoke yesterday, we've got 47 actions, it's going to take forever, and that there are some things that we can't afford to wait on, and we really need to call that out and act accordingly. So I enjoy the work that we're able to do, and hope that the off-the-wall ideas that come from the commission don't make staff members wince. I mean, ultimately, we always want to have your back and support everything you're trying to do. But that urgency is something that I hope we can continue to be eyes wide open on and act on. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kahara?
My main comments have to do with our groundwater stuff and our focus on that. I just want to thank pretty much the entire state of Oregon, because that was a pretty huge lift to get those rules redone and to us for approval. And I am amazed and quite frankly very proud of us as Oregonians to have been able to do that. It's time, and more than time, that we realize that we can't have infinite growth with finite resource. And I am quite pleased that we are taking the steps needed to protect the resource, not for just right now, but for the kids that will be born in 2050, that there will be water available for them. And that's where I'm at right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Well said.
Yeah, I would just like to echo that and thank Julie for the work and the department they did on yesterday's tour. I really did enjoy everything that we went and saw yesterday. I thought that was pretty great. And then I just wanted to revisit the work that's being done in the Harney Basin and commend the department and the direction and the collaboration that's being driven towards in that effort. And I think we've got some hard stuff to deal with in the future, and I'm looking forward to it.
Just assumed. I just wanted to thank everyone, thank the department for having the meeting down here in Southern Oregon. Our team at Medford Water was really excited to host the tour yesterday, and hopefully you found it valuable and interesting and can see, water use through the municipality perspective, and how we integrate and work with other agencies within our area. And we do a lot with, it's all about partnerships. And there's a lot of partnerships that go on in the work that we do with Rogue River Watershed Council, a lot of different environmental groups, U.S. Forest Service, as we're managing our watershed, and making sure that we're reducing fire risk in our watershed for the benefit of water quality and quantity. And so it was just great to be able to show everyone what we're doing here, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. Also wanted to say similar things to what Commissioner Chiara and Commissioner Wolf were talking about, both with the Harney Basin and with groundwater allocation. That was tough. Groundwater allocation, it's been going on for several years and more heavily in the last couple of years. And I appreciate all the work that staff did, all the revisions, all the, from public comment, taking the time to really, you saw that stack yesterday of paper. There was a lot of interest and investment in that, and there's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of unique interests in the water that we have in the state, and it's a difficult decision, yes, but it also wasn't, because that is a step in the right direction. So just thankful to the staff and to every Oregonian for getting on board and moving forward with this as we take this on. Also, Harney Basin, great presentation today, really started to really understand the steps that are going to be taken. And I like that they're going to have several tests, several models that they're going to test to see which is going to be the most beneficial for that area. So with that, just again, thank everybody for being here in Southern Oregon, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Reeves?
I guess I'm echoing thanks, hopefully not on this device, but I feel like in both in groundwater allocation and in the Harney, the staff and the members of the public who have been participating have shown this incredible steadfast dedication to moving things forward. In the case of groundwater allocation, I loved the way the staff kept, every time they talked to us, and I think they probably did it every time they talked to members of the public or the RAC, they came back to, what are we doing here? And it was the same, just, this is what we're trying to do. And they just kept that in their sights, in spite of, a fair amount of opposition to the way, I don't know that there was a lot of opposition to the idea that we had to do something, but to the way they were proposing to go about it. And I just really appreciate how they kind of stuck to it. And I feel like the same thing is happening in Harney. In Harney, there's a lot of give and take going on, which is really important because it's a place-based undertaking. And again, it's just this kind of steadfast commitment from the staff from the people in the Harney Basin, and it gives me great hope for the future to see that kind of activity, and I just really appreciate it. And that's all I got for today.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee?
Yes, I want to thank the Medford Water Commission and Julie for the great tour. I think it shows how people can work together in the watershed to come to success. And I really appreciate the work that's being done over in Harney. Looking at it from the basis of trying to develop an outcome that's voluntarily and incentivized based versus bringing down the hammer. And I think that with what's going on over there, that we will see a good outcome. Another issue that I've been working on is land use related to farm and forest. I'm on the RAC for that group at LCDC. And what's becoming apparent to me is how important water and land working together would be. As I was attending a number of the LCDC meetings, I heard from their members that they're meeting with other commissions, commission to commission. And I had the opportunity to attend the June meeting when LCDC met with ODA. And I would really encourage us, our commission, to have a like meeting with LCDC, because so much about where water goes is based on where land goes. So that's really my comments.
Thank you. I have a number of comments. I wanted to express my appreciation for the tour. A couple of points on that. I enjoyed the tour at the mill stop. I think it would have benefited from maybe a presentation from Trout Unlimited on the in-stream flow portion. It's interesting to see a project where the water user is still getting use from the water, but we are getting in-stream flow benefits, and the diversity of species in that stream was interesting. Seeing both the treatment plant and the springs at about, 2,700 feet, I think they said. I'm thinking again of the built-in natural infrastructure and going back to the 100-year vision, which contemplated creating a, permanent programmatic approach to funding both of those. I think that's still needed. I talked to some of the staff there about when they estimate, they're going to need infrastructure upgrades up at the spring facility. And, they're not immediate, but they will, that need will become apparent someday. And so being able to think ahead about that is important. Regarding the IWRS, I think it's great that the 3 new directors are weighing in on it. I do think there's, given the role of agriculture in the state as a water user, there's still a tremendous opportunity to better integrate the Department of Agriculture into that process. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunities around agriculture in the coming years. So that's something to keep in mind. I want to thank my fellow commissioners for their work. I thought people's comments today were great. They were thoughtful and productive. And I was telling April, I just have to sit here. I don't even have to say anything because people are saying such good things, which, I thought it was a good meeting. And then finally, I want to thank the staff, just the quality and consistency of staff work across all the reports, all the work on the groundwater advisory work that we did, the Harney Basin. Just the consistency is impressive. The integration of the work from the RACs is important and tremendous. So I'm just really impressed with the quality of the work and the consistency. So thank you for that.
One more piece to add. Just another thank you to Mindy and Ken for all of your work over there trying to get the technology challenges figured out. Appreciate it.
Okay, now we get the fun part. We get to acknowledge.
We aren't having a roast.
Thank Commissioner Reeves for her work. And, what I talked a little bit about this last night at dinner, but I think her ability to initiate a conversation on a topic and then facilitate it in a productive manner, to do that, all of that in a way on a difficult issue without upsetting people and without immediately sending people to their corners, is just tremendous. And it was a great example for all of us. And I very much appreciate her work on the commission. And we heard also about her other work in the service of the state of Oregon. But I think just a fabulous job as chair. And for the audience benefit, I always call her Chair Thor because she would, so harsh with the hammer. And that's my nickname for her. And she'll always be Chair Thor to me. But I just very much enjoyed working with her. It's a great learning opportunity for me, and I appreciate it and wish her the best.
Thank you, Meg, for all your years of service, and not just on this commission. Sounds like you've been serving public service for quite a while, and we've been very lucky to have you, someone like you, be a part of all of this and be a part of this commission. Your leadership it's an inspiration, and I hope that I can do as good a job as you have done on this commission in the next few years that I'm here. So, thank you, Meg.
Yeah, I feel like COVID robbed me a little bit of getting to know you better, but I've always been impressed by your the knowledge combined with the energy that you bring in dealing with the discussions. I've always been impressed by that and really appreciate you having done this for so long.
Again, thanks. It's going to be really strange to have a commission meeting without you present. Because I don't think I've ever been to a commission meeting without you present. I always appreciate the fact that you can come up with insightful questions to, whoever's presenting, that kind of helps clarify for the rest of us what the issue really is, that we're, what was the point of this, presentation or that presentation. Just always really appreciated that aspect of your being able to ask the clarifying questions that I probably felt but didn't have the words for. Thank you.
Dan, do you want to roast first? Meg, I think of you oddly as this Harry Potter character. This Hermione, no, not Hermione, not anyone in particular, but this wise, experienced, calming, intellectual deep dive into thick papers, historic perspective mentor. And you've been that since day one. I remember early on when you were describing something that the commission had to deal with relative to, we'll just say, some legal matter. And you said the facts in this case are just horrible. And as a non-attorney, I'd never heard it. I didn't know what that meant, but I've come to appreciate how difficult it can be to carry out our work within a legal framework that sometimes just doesn't fit the reality on the ground. And yet you repeatedly showed that with patience and importantly with research and study and looking back at history, how to go about that. And again, you've just been a great mentor. So we'll get you a House of Something hat or something maybe to thank you.
And I've only been able to work with you on the commission for less than 2 years, but I remember you well from the 90s when you were representing the Department of Justice and I was attending commission meetings. So I have really appreciated your knowledge and skills over the years. And I hope that you're going to be back to visit us.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Do I get to?
Yeah.
Okay.
You need to ask Joe what Sherry White.
I know, right? Is that a wizard? Well, I guess they're all wizards. I'm not a muggle, is that what? Anyway. I have had a lot of hats in my water life, basically. Representing the commission as a lawyer at Department of Justice, and then being the deputy director at the department in the early 2000s, and now back. Staffing this commission or helping to staff this. Well, when I was the deputy director, I was staffing the commission, and now back as a commissioner. And so it's been really interesting to see the agencies work from all those directions has been really interesting. And I appreciate having had the opportunity to do that. And I have a lot of thanks, basically. First, to those of you who are still in the room, the people who come to all of our meetings or appear virtually or send us, written comments. Kimberly Priestley, April Snell, Christopher Hall. I don't know if you may not know that has a real impact. Hearing from you guys has a real impact. You're giving us thoughtful, careful, honest feedback. And I know I really appreciate that. And I think about your perspectives as we're doing our work, even if we don't always ask you something when you're sitting in front of us. But so keep up the good work is what I would say. And of course, the staff, some of the staffers I've been working with, well, on and off, basically, for much of my professional life. So it's just, you do great work. And it's always so hard. Everything that we do is hard. You don't get between people and their water without taking on really challenging issues. So also keep up the good work and the good attitude about it. And then, of course, my fellow commissioners, man, I'm gonna miss you guys. It's been really fun, for one thing, working with all of you and doing the hard work together. And I just, you're gonna go forward and keep doing the hard work, and it's gonna be great. And I have nothing but positive feelings about my experience doing this job. And I mentioned last night that I'm a crier, and this has been the scourge of my professional life. And I was thinking how appropriate that there are tissues here. But do you see that I'm not crying? I'm getting through this without crying. So hooray for me. So far. Exactly. Anyway, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. And it's been a great honor for me to have this opportunity to do this work, and I couldn't be more thankful that I'm also finished with it.
Which is a great point, and we hope. It's a great closing comment, and we hope you go enjoy yourself. You've earned it. We do have a card for Meg.
I'm going to open this. I witnessed the crying observation. I'll read that on my own.
Mr. Chair, perhaps you should let the former chair do one last Thor impersonation to close the meeting.
I taught Eric everything he knows about using that thing.
We do have one public comment on this agenda item, and then she can slam the gavel to close the meeting.
Okay.
Kimberly Priestley?
For the record, my name's Kimberly Priestley, and I'm here representing Water Watch of Oregon. And I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank Meg for her many years of service in all her roles. but, most especially now, as chair and commissioner, we appreciate everything you have done for this state, with a special call out, I think, to your leadership on moving forward the groundwater allocation rules. That is really, it's critical for Oregon, and we really appreciate your work and your approach to it. And I have lots more to say, but I think the commissioners all captured it well. And I think I'll just finish with echoing Julie, which is Oregon has been and is very lucky to have you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Chris Hall?
Chair Quemps and commissioners, I did sign up online for this. I don't know why my name's not there, but first off, following everyone else, Commissioner Reeves, congratulations for your tenure. I understand that Janet Newman will be following in your stead. That's an incredible honor. She is a heroic titan, to use some of the terminology we've heard around here, in our time for what she has done to advance the conceptual knowledge and the awareness, and then all the students that she's taught. And Governor Kotek really deserves credit for making such a choice. And on that note, as we all know, the 4 attorneys that Governor Kotek, selected, or her team selected, to do the scoping for modernizing the water code. Water League is strongly in support of their work. We think that their conclusions are spot on. And I think that the idea of this modernization permeates and spreads out widely. I think that Commissioner Moles, and earlier that last year, Commissioner Lee's requests and discussions about a retreat among yourselves is a fabulous idea, and it could very well dovetail with this idea that we're looking in the 21st century for how we can continue to grow and move forward. And with Janet Newman's potential involvement, she could bring in some of those discussions that she and the other attorneys are having. I think somebody had mentioned yesterday about inviting those members of the cohort in here to present. That's a big draw because they're busy lives, but maybe in March they could be part of your retreat, or maybe just somehow show up. Anyway, congratulations on the work that you're all doing. Really appreciate the groundwater allocation rulemaking process, and just how amazing the staff and the RAC and everyone worked together on that contentious thing, and everyone kept their heads. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and you were on the list. My apologies for missing you. I wanted to check real quick if Director Gall or Deputy Director Woodcock have any comments regarding Chair Reeves.
Chairman Quimps, members of the commission, of course. I'll keep them brief, but Meg, I really can't thank you enough. Had the honor of working with you when you were our deputy director, and those were good years. We've all matured and changed, but certainly as a commissioner, I think your insight, your suggestions, your eye for detail has really helped the direction that the agency has moved and many of the decisions that we've made. So I thank you on behalf of the department and on Oregonians and water management there. And I certainly wish you the best with future years and your grandchild and everything else. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Quimps. For the record, Doug Woodcock with the department. We had a very nice dinner last night, and we had an opportunity to really share some feelings and some expressions around the history of our working together over the years. And it's just been a fantastic experience for the department, Meg, that you are have been here and helping to guide the commission with your own experiences and just an observation, a couple of observations, I guess. Over the years in working with you, I would just note that as I receive phone calls from commissioners, I could generally, before I even look to see who it is, I could go, it's going to be Meg. And it's like, Doug, I've been reading this, and I'm just, I'm just wondering, what's the department's take on this? Because this just seems a little funny to me. And you're just persistent looking at something and going, this bears some explanation. I think I'm going to call the director. And that is invaluable. It really does keep the department on its toes. And I just cannot say enough about that. And a second observation is, here you are on your very last commission meeting. And yesterday, digging deep into the IWRS and your thoughts about how this commission and the department and the state could go forward on that, rather than thinking about off with the grandchildren or your next vacation. You've just been fully engaged. And we just so very much appreciate that. So thank you, and we do wish you the very best. Thank you.
Now, I will say that it is kind of weird, your last meeting, because you're kind of weighing in. I was weighing in on things that I'm not going to be participating in. It's like, wait a minute, maybe you should just stay out of this. But I appreciate both the comments, from both of you guys. Can I say one other thing that's unrelated to my departure? About the IWRS. I'm sorry, I've been thinking this and I just feel like I have to get it out there. I really, this is such a moment in the state for attention to water issues. And we need some kind of organizing principle about water that goes across not just this agency, but the other water agencies as well, and kind of trying to find that. I think you could use the Four Friends letter as assuming everything goes smoothly, Janet is going to be on this commission, and it would be, I just feel like an organizing principle could help integrate all the agencies. And I don't know what it would be, but I kind of feel like that's what we're looking for to harness this moment. So go forth and find an organizing principle. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds to me like the volunteer for a subcommittee.
Okay, that concludes our business. We are adjourned.